2024 전주 세계무형유산 투어리즘 포럼입니다. 올해는 전주 세계무형유산 대상과 함께 우리 전주문화재단이 후원으로 전주 세계무형유산 투어리즘 포럼을 첫 번째로 가지게 되었습니다. 이런 기회 때문이라도 우리 전 세계에서 활약하고 계시는 무형유산의 저명한 연구자님들이 우리 전주에 찾아오시게 됨을 대단히 영광스럽게 생각하면서 포럼을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 포럼의 사회자 전북대학교의 김영근입니다. 반갑습니다. 포럼의 오프닝 세레모니는 그렇게 길지 않을 것 같습니다. 간단하게 말씀을 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 전주문화재단의 대표 이사님입니다. 철학기 전주문화재단 대표 이사님의 환영사 말씀을 먼저 청해 듣도록 하겠습니다. 여러분, 철학기 대표 이사님께 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
네, 반갑습니다. 전주문화재단 대표를 맡고 있는 최락기입니다. 대한민국을 대표하는 전통문화도시 전주에서 개최되는 2024 전주 세계무형유산 포럼에 오신 여러분들을 모두 진심으로 환영합니다. 오늘 이렇게 전주에서 세계 각국에서 오신 석학들과 전문가 여러분들을 모시게 돼서 진심으로 기쁘고 반갑게 생각합니다. 기조 발제를 맡아주신 국제민속학 및 민속학회 회장이신 로버트 바른 교수님과 그다음에 한국문화관광연구원 관계자분들 다시 한번 감사드리고요. 또 이 자리의 중요성을 인식하시고 먼 거리를 마다하지 않고 참석해 주신 아마레스엘 갈라 교수님과 호주 아델라이드 대학교의 길라드 주커먼 교수님께도 진심으로 감사를 드립니다. 그리고 포럼을 주관하신 우리 하만이 무형문화연구원장님께 진심으로 감사를 드리며 무형유산과 관광 분야의 많은 전문가분들이 포럼에서 발제와 토론을 통해 보다 가치 있는 아젠다를 끌어내 주실 것으로 기대를 하고 있습니다. 전주는 오랜 역사와 전통을 간직한 도시로 무형유산의 소중함을 깊이 이해하고 그 가치를 지키기 위해 노력해온 곳입니다. 이번 포럼은 이러한 전주의 전통과 가치관을 세계화 나누고 무형유산과 관광 산업의 지속 가능한 발전을 논의하는 뜻깊은 자리입니다. 무형유산은 사람과 사람 사이에서 과거와 현재를 잇고 미래로 나아가는 살아있는 유산입니다. 이러한 우리의 무형유산은 관광과 연계해서 지역의 문화의 격을 높일 수 있는 아주 소중한 자원이라고 생각을 합니다. 이번 포럼을 통해서 무형유산과 관광의 선순환적 연계 방안을 모색하기 위해서 마련된 이번 포럼이 지속 가능성을 가질 수 있는 건지 한번 같이 고민해보고 논의해보는 자리가 아닌가 싶습니다. 빠른 속도로 변화하는 현대사회에서 사라져가는 무형유산을 보호하기 위해 여러분의 소중한 의견과 경험이 이번 포럼을 더욱 풍성하게 만들어줄 것입니다. 함께하신 모든 분들이 적극적으로 참여하셔 주시기를 바라며 뜻깊은 성과를 거두시기를 바랍니다. 다시 한번 전주에서 뜻깊은 시간 여러분을 초대할 수 있게 돼서 감사하게 생각합니다. 고맙습니다.
네, 전주문화재단 최락기 대표이사님의 환영사였습니다. 전주문화재단은 전주시의 문화예술을 지원하기 위한 기관입니다. 굳이 전통예술에 국한되지 않고 이 시대 당시대의 예술도 이렇게 지원해주면서 전주시가 사람 살기 좋은 공간으로 만드는 데 일조를 하고 있습니다. 그러나 어디까지나 그 코어 핵심은 전통예술, 유관, 역사, 문화예술이라고 할 것이고요. 그런 문화예술들이 뒷받침돼서 오늘날의 전주 문화예술이 더욱더 향유될 수 있는 문화가 풍부하게 살친다라고 생각을 하고 있습니다. 앞으로도 많은 관심과 지원 부탁드리겠습니다. 다음은 칼링가 대학의 아마레스 월 갈라 교수님의 축사가 있겠습니다. 여러분, 아마레스 월 갈라 교수님을 모시겠습니다.
Choi Rocky. President Choi Rocky, Jeonju Cultural Foundation, Professor Hamhani, Founding Director of Center for Intangible Cultural Studies, and distinguished scholar, and dear colleagues and friends. This is a very important forum, and it comes at a time when much needs to be discussed. This morning I referred to the Mondayo cult in Mexico, the global good of culture, culture as global good. But one of the challenges still is, as we meet in Barcelona next year, to address the location of responsible tourism, or what we like to call heritage tourism, within that global good that we're talking about. And the intersectionality of SDGs and World Tourism Organization is very timely, very important, because midterm review of SDGs has shown that we have not really made much progress as such, except in some areas. There's still a long way to go, such a long way to go that the Mondayo cult in Mexico, when they met, they started talking about the post-SDGs, culture as a separate sustainable development goal after 2030. And why the intersectionality is important is post-pandemic, tourism has recovered, but what's happened is it's not the same as the ethical World Heritage tourism that we were promoting before. There's more based on economics that were affected by the pandemic. So we need to address that when we talk about post-pandemic tourism, the location of culture. And also the other thing is that increasingly there's a demand for the value of tourism and the value of heritage in tourism. And I know some of us don't like to measure culture. However, when we got World Bank economists looking over your shoulder, you have to be conscious of it. And so people like David Throsby have developed methodologies through UNESCO, through various forums on how to value culture through contingency evaluation and choice modeling. So we need more demonstration projects that just doesn't talk about intangible heritage in tourism, but actually valuing intangible heritage in tourism. And the other thing is that we are in Jeonju, a nodal point for the heritage of Korea. It's through the mayor here, local government. The first voice, I've written extensively about it. It's in Korean as well, my writings on first voice. The first voice of local community should not be lost. The cultural and linguistic diversity of people needs to be appreciated. Just imagine if tourism overtakes a beautiful and brilliant intangible heritage through global tourism in Jeonju, it'll be very sad. So how do we actually safeguard the first voice of local people in tourism? And thirdly, if SDGs are addressed through tourism in local communities, then the tourism will be sustainable and local identities will be valued. So I wish the JIFIT forum all the best in debating and discussing, locating intangible heritage within responsible tourism. Remember, heritage, the difference, all tourism is cultural. But why heritage tourism is different is you're dealing with non-renewable resources in heritage tourism. And yes, intangible heritage is living and dynamic and constantly changing. However, the first voice of local communities is important for its sustainability. So with that, once again, congratulations to the organizers, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
네, 칼라 갈리가 대학의 아마레스월 칼라 교수님이십니다. 무형유산과 관광은 상당히 양가적인 입장입니다. 지금 우리 시대는 무형유산을 활용해서 어떻게든 사람들이 많이 오게끔 만드는 것이 숙제인 것처럼 보이지만 이미 이 시대를 지난 나라들은 더 이상 관광객이 안 왔으면 좋겠는 오버 투어리즘을 앓고 있기도 합니다. 또한 무형유산이 산업화되거나 관광산업으로 개발되면 본질이 훼손되어서 무조건 인기만 얻자라고 하는 방향으로 가기 때문에 본질의 훼손의 문제, 공동체의 와해, 개인의 정체성이 훼손되는 문제들도 있습니다. 이런 긍정적인 면, 또 부정적인 면, 이 모두가 이틀간의 학술대회에서 충분하게 검토되리라고 보여집니다. 마지막으로 개회사인데요. 무형문화연구원 하만희 원장님께서 개회사를 해주시겠습니다.
저희가 이렇게 그 포럼을 열게 된 거에 대해서 그 여러 도움을 우선은 제가 도움을 많이 받은 그 문화재단 우리 최락기 대표이사님께 감사를 드립니다. 그리고 저희가 무형유산의 중심 도시로 성장하는 그 전주를 또 그 조금 더 이렇게 좀 세계적으로 이렇게 홍보하고 싶은 마음에 세계 여러 나라의 무형유산에 대해서 관심을 가지고 계신 그 우리 전문가들을 모셨습니다. 그래서 그 먼 길을 마다않고 와주신 우리 발표자 그리고 토론자 여러분들께 감사를 드립니다. 이번 포럼에서는 저희가 굉장히 중요한 주제를 다루게 될 것 같습니다. 우리 지금 사회자도 방금 지적하신 바와 같이 무형유산과 관광이 가지는 약간 이율배반적인 그 요소들이 존재합니다. 그래서 요즘은 과잉 관광으로 인해서 무형유산 공동체가 몸살을 앓고 있는 곳도 있기는 합니다. 그러나 한편으로는 또 무형유산 공동체를 저희가 보호하는 그런 차원에서 이거를 관광과 연계시켜서 두 가지 목적을, 그러니까 유네스코에서도 지금 추진하고 있는데 경제적인 어떤 혜택이 좀 필요한 경우도 있고, 또 하나는 문화적 다양성을 키우기 위해서 무형유산이 지속 가능해져야 되는데 이런 것들이 여러 가지 이유로 정치적인 이유, 생태적인 원인으로 인해서 자꾸 소멸되거나 훼손되어 가는 것을 방지하기 위해서라도 이런 그 투어리즘과 연계를 시켜서 이런 보호의 차원에서 이 프로모션을 하는 그런 목적을 가지고 이 그 관광을 증진시키고자 하는 그런 운동이 있습니다. 그래서 이 과잉 관광의 문제와 또 어떻게 보면은 지금까지 소홀히 취급되어 온 무형문화유산 공동체 혹은 무형문화유산 보호단체 개인들을 조금 더 이렇게 그 가치를 다시 우리가 탐구해주는 그런 목적에서 관광을 하나의 좋은 툴로 사용하고 있습니다. 저희 그 이번 포럼의 기본이 됐던 배경이 됐던 것은 유네스코 NGO 포럼에서 무형유산과 관광 툴을 만든 워킹 그룹이 있습니다. 그래서 그 워킹 그룹들이 오늘 여기에 많이 참석하셨습니다. 그래서 그분들의 발표를 우리가 이제 그 오후 그다음에 내일까지 또 들을 수도 있는 아주 좋은 기회입니다. 자, 그래서 저희가 이런 그 무형유산과 관광은 굉장히 중요한 여러 가지 이슈를 가지고 있고, 또 특히 저희 전주 같은 경우에는 우리보다 뭐 경주나 혹은 다른 그 우리나라의 커다란 그 문화유산, 역사유산을 가지고 있는 유형의 유산을 가지고 있는 도시와는 다르게 저희는 일상생활에 바탕을 둔 무형의 유산이 많고, 그 무형의 유산을 잘 보석처럼 가꾸고자 하는 그 전주시의 정책이 있습니다. 그래서 이런 거에 그 힘을 받아가지고 저희는 이번 주제가 일상생활에 바탕을 둔 무형유산, 그것을 어떻게 지속 가능한 관광으로 또는 지속 가능한 무형유산 보호로 이끌어낼 수 있을 것인가 하는 논의를 그 유네스코의 그 NGO 포럼과 그다음에 그 밖에 또 다른 곳에서 활동하는 전문가들을 모시고 저희가 이틀 동안 발표도 하고 토론도 하고 해서 좋은 결과를, 좋은 성과를 얻어내고자 합니다. 그래서 이것을 바탕으로 해서 전주가 가장 모범적인 무형유산을 통한 관광의 모범이 되고 모델이 되는 도시가 되기를 희망하면서 저희가 이런 포럼을 기획을 했습니다. 와주신 모든 분들께 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 네, 여러분 환영합니다.
네, 무형문화연구원 하만희 원장님께서 개사를 해주셨습니다. 우리 연구자들의 포럼은 대부분 연구자들끼리만의 소통으로 이것이 실제적으로 실천되고 시행되는 데는 좀 갭차가 벌어지는 것이 일반적입니다. 그러나 이번 포럼은 우리 전주문화재단과 함께 공동으로 학술대회를 주관함으로써 이것이 정책적으로도 실현이 되고 이러한 혜택들이 관광이나 문화에 대한 지원 혜택들이 여러 사람들에게 골고루 나아갈 수 있는 실천까지 담보할 수 있는 학술대회라고 기대를 하면서 이제 다음 순서로 넘어갈까 합니다. 오프닝 세레모니는 이 정도고요. 우리가 전체적으로 특징을 보면 국제학술대회 하면은 외형적으로 많은 연구자들이 발표를 하는 모습을 취하기를 되게 주최 측에 바라십니다. 그래서 다 10분, 15분 정도 발표하고 이렇게 넘어가는데 너무 그럴 때는 내용도 없는 발표고 뭐 또 하고 해서 우리는 최대한 충분한 시간에 발표 시간을 확보하자라는 일환으로 이렇게 조금 발표자의 수를 줄이는 대신 발표의 질을 높였다 이렇게 해주시면 되겠습니다. 그럼 기조 강연을 우리가 1시간 동안 청해서 들을 텐데요. 고처대학과 국제민속학 및 민속학계 워킹그룹의 공동의장인 로버트 바런 교수의 무형유산과 지속가능한 관광이라는 제목으로 기조 강연을 듣도록 하겠습니다. 이 단상을 저쪽으로 위치하시고 PPT를 준비해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 여러분, 로버트 바론 교수에게 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'd like to express my gratitude for the honor of doing this keynote speech at during a week where there's been extraordinary experiences. We've been welcomed with marvelous hospitality and insights and experiences of Korean traditional culture, ICH. I want to express my particular gratitude to Hani Han and to Shinma Hong for all the work that they've done on this for this week, and the extraordinary work that the Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage Studies does, and Korea as a leader in the ICH world. Now to begin, I just want to refer to my, I can see this is fine. Not all tourism is pretty. We know that there's a good and a bad with tourism, and we approach it with our eyes open. Tourism inevitably, or almost inevitably, involves some sort of change in the ICH. And I'll explore the various kinds of changes that occur when ICH occurs and when traditions are presented and experienced outside of their customary context. I'll also be looking at the larger social, economic, and our environmental impacts on ICH through tourism. I'll talk about what our role as cultural practitioners, as cultural brokers, could be, particularly with regard to how we can enable communities to have self-determination about the direction of their tourism, or ICH tourism, and to present their cultures on their own terms. So, I guess this is the first slide. Okay. Okay, so when a cultural practices appears on any kind of ICH listing, it's often, maybe even almost inevitable, that tourism will follow in its wake, like a ship coming along. There'll be tourism following from a listing in ICH. And there are changes in form and in content and in cultural meaning when traditions that are customarily presented in everyday festive and ceremonial life are presented to tourists, whether through listings or otherwise, because ICH tourism happens all the time, whether we're involved in it or not. These changes can be beneficial, they can be damaging, or they can be both beneficial and damaging. Tourism gives new sources of income to communities and to bearers, and it gives them opportunities to develop the skills and to practice their traditions. It can revitalize traditions no longer practiced because there are opportunities for them to practice them and present them and market them and create them in a new way to new audiences. But the adaptations that ICH makes experiences because of tourism can mean a loss of cultural meaning, can mean diminished aesthetic quality, and it also can mean a loss of local participation. And displacement of people and communities goes hand in hand with tourism. I think it's a reality that we can't ignore, and we have to keep our eyes open about it. It involves intrusion to places of cultural significance, meaning places where people will ordinarily gather. Rents will increase, and housing will be lost, will be too expensive for local people. And that all affects the fabric of everyday life, intangible cultural heritage in a broad way. Intangible cultural heritage is not just elements and things. It involves a sense of place, it involves the experience of life. So what's key is community self-determination. They need to make the choice about how tourism will be carried out, own tourist businesses so that the money doesn't leak out of the community, and again, as I said, represent the ICH in their own terms. And this is essential for ethical and sustainable tourism. Communities may make the choice of rejecting tourism entirely, or they might limit the access to places of importance and sacred significance, particularly treasured places, to outsiders. They might restrict it or they might limit it. I'll show some examples of that. And they should be able to establish guidelines for appropriate tourist behavior. And I'll be speaking about over-tourism, which is a very hot topic around the world, particularly in some places where there's a great deal of tourism, like in Europe and places in Bali. So there can be a spreading out of activities in a spatial sense within a community or across the seasons at times of less tourism. We as practitioners of ICH are cultural brokers, which means that we can provide, broker makes things happen. We act in a mediating kind of way. We can provide access to resources. We can assist with the promotion of places within an ICH framework. We can do capacity building for business skills for ICH practitioners. We should also collaborate in planning with local communities and provide advice based on our own experiences with ICH tourism. But it requires community consent for involvement, and we also have to know when we need to leave and a community needs to take charge of tourism on its own terms. We can work with communities in a positive way, collaboratively, to design programs for tourism which make possible substantive, face-to-face, immersive experiences that are participatory and don't intrude upon a culture. And as people who work in NGOs, as direct them or involved in non-governmental organizations, we're in a very good position to lead the way to the understanding of ICH within tourism and show how tourism can be sustainable, drawing from our experiences on the ground, working directly with communities, doing research and presenting and facilitating presentations and performances and demonstrations and other activities, and and also because we're aware of how tourism and ICH are so closely intertwined. I'd like to talk about a couple of trends in tourism. There's been a shift in tourism, we can call it a paradigm shift, from mass tourism, which dominated tourism for many years, to increasing phenomenon of experiential tourism. Tourists increasingly prefer experiential travel to mass tourism, which is distancing, which places people at a remove from cultures and communities and ICH practices. It's less mediated, and it's often participatory experiential tourism. It involves encounters in back regions where life has been lived away from the gaze of tourists. Now, in the scholarship about tourism, there's a distinction made between front regions and back regions. Front regions are where it's a tourist zone. It's a place where ICH will be presented in a controlled and theatricalized sort of way, typically, and it's connected with mass tourism, that tourists will only go to particular areas. What's happening with experiential tourism is that tourists are going beyond these front regions where tourists normally gather and going into communities, going deeply into communities. It can be an intrusive sort of thing, which means that there's less and less local use and connection to places which are culturally significant in cultural practices. So you might find a cafe or a concert venue or a place where people gather in a community, and it's overwhelmed with tourists, and local people don't have the experience of being in places that they've gone to all their lives. And it's a sudden and very traumatic shift. And experiential tourism has been fueled. It's happened because of a number of different factors: Airbnbs and other sorts of homestays, Lonely Planet types of guidebooks that suggest back region places to go, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook posts about tourism, travelers' blogs where they exchange experiences and they point to the back regions where people can go, and such experiences as cooking and crafts classes, local music venues, and restaurants. There's also a phenomenon known as slow tourism, and I think many of you have heard about slow food, where food is locally sourced and you enjoy the experience of eating, and it doesn't involve industrial food production as a reaction to the way food is processed and consumed. So tourism is a variety of experiential tourism. It's a kind of experiential tourism which emphasizes spending more time in a place, direct and immersive cultural experiences of local places, low carbon transportation, and a multi-sensory, meaning seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, a total kind of experience, savoring of a place, enjoying a place, rather than a quick movement between destinations, and it means being in tune with ecology and diversity. That's from a book named Slow Tourism that's published in 2010. Jeonju is a cheetah slow, and just as there's a slow food movement, there's a slow city movement. Cheetah is slow in Italian. And when Jeonju was recertified in 2016, the international organization Cheetah Slow noted in Jeonju the landscape management and maintenance of the Hanok village, which is right at our feet over here, right outside, the revitalization of neighborhood business districts, the protection of traditions, and the spread of Cheetah Slow awareness by local residents and visitors. So I think we can see very clearly that there's a strong consciousness of heritage among the local community here. And there's been a surge in tourism. I think it's really been preponderantly from Koreans, as I understand, and it jumped from 3.5 million in 2010 to 9.65 million in 2016, and I'm sure it's even much more now. And we're learning through our experience in Jeonju how this huge increase is managed and the pace of a city that has so many tourists. So we're in a tourist area now, and we see how it's experienced, and there's certainly guideposts, and if we read the signage around here, if we walk around the communities, we see that I think that there's a cheetah slow kind of perspective. So in contrast to experiential tourism or the slow tourism variety of experiential tourism, it involves a guided rather than a self-directed experience. And it's experience, again, that occurs in the front region. And there's another term which is very famous and very important in the study of tourism, known as stage authenticity. It was by Dean McCannell, who's a tourism scholar, sociologist, who was following from a framework which was established by the sociologist Irving Goffman. And what stage authenticity is are cultural displays which are substantially theatricalized and heavily mediated, as I say. So it comes between you and the experience of the ICH. And I think a prime example of that are the folklore shows, where you have highly choreographed song and dance ensembles, which are substantially and fundamentally different from traditional folklore. It's a theatricalization, it's a staged version of ICH, and that's closely associated with mass tourism and with front regions. So what's happening now in tourism globally is back regions are becoming like front regions in a sense, because the local character of these back regions is endangered, it's at risk. As an urban planner, Angelos Varvaroussis said in a recent article in Financial Times, tourism is now, the issues in tourism now are qualitatively different from mass tourism. He's saying that we really passed beyond the period of the era of mass tourism. Says it's not a matter of numbers, towns, regions, and entire countries are turning into touristified societies, which means their landscapes, their self-images are being operationalized to serve tourists. So I think you can see that in some places in the world, and there's a pushback against it. Recently, maybe you read or heard about what was happening in Barcelona, where there were water pistols aimed at tourists and demonstrations by many people, scores, hundreds of people in Barcelona saying, we don't want tourists here. These are places that are precious to us. And but the feeling that so much of Barcelona and other cities like Venice have been taken over by tourists. So what can we do about it as ICH practitioners, as cultural brokers? We're professionally equipped to produce non-intrusive programming in front regions. So, I think it's possible to rethink the idea of a front region where it's only the theatricalized and very mediated experiences are. We could go into the front regions, and I think we have at times with traditional festivals, for example, and with presentations that are appropriately grounded and represented and recontextualized in the community-based cultural practices. So I want to turn now to some of the larger economic, social, and environmental contexts which impact ICH and tourism generally. Tourism has very often been seen as the largest service industry in the world. It has major local, regional, national, global impacts on employment, the economy, natural environment, physical infrastructure, social structures, and especially in societies which are dependent on tourism. It's represented the largest population movements across national borders in the history of humankind. So, just think about that, of the hundreds of millions of people who are engaged in tourism, moving across borders, leaving their home communities at an accelerating pace, particularly in the late 20th and early 21st century. Now we see, as mentioned before, that the sudden loss of tourism during the pandemic really made a crash in many tourism-dependent societies. Now we see revenge tourism, as it's known. So people have been traveling and being tourists with a fury, with a great deal of tourism, an upsurge in tourism in the last 2 years. In the first quarter of 2024, it represented $3.3 trillion, 3% of the global gross domestic product. And in the first quarter of 2024, again, 295 million international tourists. In 2023, 330 million people were employed in travel and tourism jobs. That's UN tourism. That's what the World Tourism Organization is known as now. Is tourism clean and green? It's been thought that tourism is a clean industry because they're not smokestacks. There's not the kind of pollution that you get from manufacturing. Nevertheless, it has serious environmental impacts. Even though ecotourism can protect endangered flora and fauna, so that is a niche in tourism which is respectful of the environment. Much more often, however, tourism of any kind causes such phenomena as noise and light pollution, it disturbs bird nesting sites, and it damages coral reefs. And air travel of any kind for tourism emits a high amount of carbon. It's their efforts by airlines to diminish the amount of carbon that's emitted, but still it's a very big source of carbon. And some people who advocate for ethical tourism and environmentally responsible tourism contend that people should really travel close to home in a kind of slow tourism. There can be situations that are environmentally friendly but are damaging to ICH tourism. If you have new environmental regulations, people who are in traditional occupations like maritime occupations or agricultural occupations, particularly maritime is a good example, they can't fish like they had before. And indigenous communities, I think particularly you can see that in East Africa, are displaced as national parks and wildlife reserves are created. One kind of response, a couple of responses that have occurred, has been to train displaced fishermen in Anilao, which is in the Western Philippines, for jobs in scuba diving and training indigenous East Africans for jobs in protected wildlife areas. So the idea there is you give employment to people who have been displaced. But nevertheless, it means that there's an endangerment and a loss of the active heritage practice in people who are involved in herding pastoral occupations in East Africa, for example, or fishing in the Philippines, as I mentioned. So they lose their heritage practices that are associated with the traditional occupations, and the places where they've worked and lived change. To look a bit at tourism, employment, and local economies, tourism creates new jobs, although most of the jobs are in low-wage and service occupations. The benefit from tourism happens on a very local level, in sort of a micro level, where the informal economy benefits from tourists, where local shops are patronized, market vendors, people selling things on the street, gain income, and souvenirs are sold by people locally, which may include traditional crafts, or it may include tourist art. And tourist art is a complex phenomenon because it certainly is a transformation, it's a change from traditional crafts, for example, which can be substantial, but can, in instances, contain an element of tradition. So another way that ICH from displaced communities and occupations that are no longer practiced is presented as in programs for ICH, that particularly occurs in museums and heritage sites, and in places like that, such as industrial heritage sites in various parts of the world. Formerly employed workers will present the occupational practices that they practiced in the past, and there might be crafts demonstrations, such as blacksmithing is a frequent example, that are presented as historical reconstructions, meaning they're revived from the way they might have been in the past, or they're presented by retired workers or workers who've been displaced by deindustrialization. Some of the economic vulnerabilities that occur in tourism involves, a major one actually involves economic leakage. That's a term in economics, which means that the benefit economic leaks out of the community in the context of tourism that occurs when large national, multinational corporations move into and dominate the tourist industries. Their foreign employees rather than local residents are hired, and food and other kinds of goods are imported rather than using what's grown locally. So what's important for us to advocate for is local ownership of tourism businesses and as much use as possible of local products, which keep profits within the community. And they also contribute to the sustainability of local culture, because this is what people have been customarily eating and producing and consuming, and it's ICH. When tourism dominates an economy, it can become like a monoculture, which means a single crop is produced. So you have a place to just produce rice, and there's the danger if there's a flooding, for example, and they can't grow the rice. So with tourism, there's severe economic damage, as we saw a few years ago, when there's a pandemic or a natural disaster and then there's not a diversified economy. And tourist-dependent island nations are especially vulnerable to that, because they, the Caribbean is a very good example of that, and islands in the Indian Ocean, some of the tourism islands. And there's also a change in the rhythm of the year with tourism. So in some places, the people are very intensively employed for a few months, and then they may leave their community, right, for a number of months. So this impacts such kinds of ICH as cyclical festivals which happen at particular times during the year. To look at gender in the tourism economy, it does open up new employment opportunities for women. I cite here Herb Chambers. I have a list of references at the end. Women are almost twice as likely to be employed in tourism than in other sectors, and represent 54% of all employees in tourism. Women are overrepresented in service positions, but they're underrepresented in management and expertise. Women may become the sole wage earner for the family, and that will often disrupt domestic relationships, particularly when the men aren't working. I heard from a Chinese colleague once about a village in China where the women were working tourism and the men were at home, and I think that that was disruptive, and it also may have impacts that I think are worth exploring on ICH, which is gendered, which is the case of much ICH is practiced by men or women, but not by both. So I said at the beginning that this transformation changes of form and of content and of cultural meaning with tourism. So with performance traditions, they become condensed, they're shorter in length. And the elements of spectacle are emphasized, the ones which are exciting, really visible, really vibrant, and showy are emphasized. There's a simplification of content in order to make them more comprehensible, more easily experienced by tourists. Now, ICH may be revitalized in its customary context through new opportunities for practice and presentation enabled by tourism opportunities. I'll show you an example in a moment from Bali, which means that there's more of an opportunity to perform ICH because of tourism, and it has an impact that can be quite positive for ICH. One example is when adaptations which are made for tourist audiences are absorbed in traditional non-tourism practices. So it means it's not like tourism is over here and local practices over there. There's an interpenetration there. One affects the other. And with the transformation as tourism, cultural meaning may be radically altered. Cultural meaning might be totally lost. But new meaning can emerge as a result of presentations for tourists. They just have a different meaning and significance as a kind of representation of a community. And as with much of tourism, and so much of what I'm speaking about, tourism is something which is maybe even more often than not ambiguous, not totally good and not totally bad. So here's the example from Balinese dance, and hope I'm able to keep people awake better. We had a nice long lunch, and the weather's kind of muggy, so I have a few images So in Bali is a prime example of tourist productions providing experience of training for dancers and financial benefits. So what happens is the money which is made from Balinese dance, which is a very large part of the tourist experience in Bali, for any of you who've been there, and it's invested to buy new materials for traditional dances and equipment for dancers. And there, as we see the influence on traditional practices here, that they use those materials and their equipment for dances performed in traditional dance for Balinese audiences out of sight of tourists. Remember, before I went to Bali in 1989, I called Edward Bruner, who's an important scholar of tourism, and I said, where do I go to in Bali to see the real thing? Essentially what I was saying, where do I see the traditional dance? He said, well, you should go to the dance presentations for the tourists, because that's part of, understanding the whole complex of dance and tourism, and it contains such strong elements and dimensions of traditional Balinese dance. The dance which has been created for tourists in Bali has also entered the traditional repertoire. Again, you see this loop, this effect where there's a new dance which is created in tourism, and then becomes traditionalized, and becomes absorbed within tradition and practice within temples. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, thinking about how ICH may seem to damage a traditional practice. It can have the impact of creating a new tradition, something that becomes traditionalized and absorbed within the culture. Bali is a good example, as there are many examples in performance of an emphasis on spectacle, spectacularization. And that's particularly true for the representation of transpossession. But communities which present spirit possession or transpossession typically, I think, want to avoid people actually getting possessed. I've heard that from Afro-Caribbean ritual practitioners who perform in ensembles that present adaptations of traditional dance from Haiti or other parts of the Caribbean. So there are times where it might seem to cross over into an actual experience where people get possessed, and it does happen from time to time. But there's an effort to control it, which again makes it something different from something that we practice in a customary way. And I mentioned the folkloric dance, which is fundamentally different from traditional folklore as something that occurs within the front regions. So Bali is one famous example in the scholarship and the study of tourism. So is a Laude festival in Hondarribia, in the Basque region of Spain. And we see an example there of how a practice is adapted for tourism. It seems to be really irreversibly damaged, and their cultural losses, but their gains for ICH and for the culture, which are unexpected. So it commemorates a 17th century victory over the French by the Basque. Before the 1970s, there was almost total participation by local people and a great symbolic importance. Then, after then, it became a tourist attraction for the city government, which promoted it heavily, an event which was staged. Residents attended it less and less, and there was less interest in it as a living kind of heritage. It was performed twice daily instead of once, which is a very fundamental change in the way a tradition may be practiced. And David Greenwood, an anthropologist, was the one who studied and was very distressed and very negative about what had happened. But then David Greenwood returned to Hondarribia, and he saw that there was now a new cultural meaning by the late 1980s. Now people saw that the outsiders and local people themselves saw that there was a contemporary political significance because there was this contest over political rights in Spain because of the movement for Basque autonomy within Spain or independently. And so there's greater political awareness of the political rights of Basques among both Basques and non-Basques, and they're more conscious of their heritage. Now it became a self-representation to outsiders. So you see what's happening here. It seems like the practice is destroyed. It has no value. It's lost cultural meaning, but it actually has a new kind of cultural meaning, even though it's become touristified. Turning to crafts, I want to look at some community-driven programs in crafts. that serve tourists, but also have had a revitalizing effect on the ICH. In many parts of the world, the crafts cooperatives and public programs would serve tourist markets, and they maintain the aesthetic quality and the cultural meaning and control of the market. And the crafts, however, may embody the changes in traditions that are generated by productions for tourists. So this is like the situation I just looked at. There's a change in a tradition because of tourism, and it becomes absorbed within the culture. These crafts programs and programs by cooperative programs and community-driven crafts organizations, they'll often include educational demonstrations and hands-on activities where tourists can experience the practice of a craft. So I think that these successful programs, and I'll show you a couple examples in a moment, show how successful ICH tourism can serve as a vehicle for sustaining cultural practices on a community's own terms, while providing economic benefits for people who practice ICH and their communities. So here's one example. Unfortunately, I think actually this is a previous version of a PowerPoint that I provided. I think there was a little bit of a mix-up. So I can't show the hyperlink here, but I can, you can imagine it. So the basketry, the Toho no Odorum, who were called in the past improperly Apache, who were in southwest U.S. and northwest Mexico, it was originally made solely for utilitarian purposes, for just everyday sorts of activities in the community. Then it changed in response to the changes in availability of materials and the interests of collectors and tourists beginning in the late 19th century. So new forms of this kind of basketry developed. They became ongoing traditions. So, and then the sale of these baskets, which were decorative baskets but practiced within the community in the beginning of the late 19th century, became an important source of income as the economy of the Tohono O'odham changed from a subsistence and barter economy to something which was closer to a contemporary market economy. Like traditional crafts in other places in the world, miniature baskets were created which could fit in people's luggage. And we can compare, as a change in form, transformation in form, condensation in performance, where performances become shorter, with miniaturization in crafts. So this is a very tangible and concrete change in form that happens with tourism. In the late 20th century, the programs developed to collectively organize production within communities, create new tourist programming, while also networking with other Native American basket makers. So there was a basketry organization for the O'odham that was created in 1996. And like other crafts cooperatives within communities that serve tourists, it enabled direct source sales to the public, rather eliminating middlemen. So there's not economic leakage in this example again. So the people creating the craftspeople get the money, the profits, the revenue directly. This basketry organization helped to revitalize the basketry tradition, and it gave control of the market and quality to the craftspeople who were selling the baskets. This cooperative also had basket making classes. They negotiated permits for harvesting basket materials on public, private, and tribal lands. And I might mention also in talking about environmental impacts on ICH associated with tourism is that because of climate change, traditional materials are lost. So we can see that reflected and embodied in crafts which are produced for tourists. They were involved in networking with other Native basketry groups because there were several Native American basketry organizations that were formed in that period in the late 90s. Among the activities they're involved in is a celebration of basketry and native foods at a museum, the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, which is a museum for a general audience. And this celebration includes weavers and foodways practitioners from different North American regions, from different tribal groups among Native American people. It includes participatory demonstrations that anybody can be involved in, and the sale of baskets. So for another example, I want to mention the Tan Ha Pottery Village in Hoi An, Vietnam. It's been a very important force for revitalizing and showcasing and selling to tourists the pottery that's practiced in Hoi An, which is terracotta and brown earthenware pottery, and had been produced for over 4 centuries, and it got a boost. It got revitalization through this pottery village, which was designed for tourists. It's a highly participatory site. Tourists were able to see, but also practice clay preparation, shaping of pots and pottery, and firing of the kiln. So they can do it all along with the traditional practitioners. There's also classes for people within the community and for younger people for the school programs. And also the Tanha Pottery Village is also exemplary because it's a place where people can experience other kinds of ICH. So there are folk songs that are performed. There's a game called the Bai Choi game, and there's a ceremony for deity that involves a bamboo dragon boat. So these different kinds of ICH are practiced within this one site, which is especially focused on pottery. Oops. So here's an illustration of it. And it's also been a place, Tanha Pottery Village, that has addressed over-tourism using a strategy which has been effective. So the central part of Hoi An, Vietnam, I'm going to speak in more depth about Hoi An in just a few minutes. It's located at some distance away from the heavily touristed concentration in the center of town. So this is a strategy to address tourists. You spread out activities in different parts of an area, so it's not concentrated in just one place. I was thinking today of a student who did work in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, Guanajuato, Mexico, and she found that there were micro-enterprises, small tourist businesses that involved people looking for mushrooms, gathering mushrooms, that involved foodways experience, that involved walks through the forest and learning about the traditional practices in forestry. With the Hoi An Pottery Village, it involves partnerships between the local community, the immediate community in Hoi An, government agencies, and commercial tourism businesses. And this enabled them to do eco-friendly construction of vernacular buildings and new kilns. And this is actually, I'm speaking about as a response to some of the infrastructure damage. I think that's something that's also a social and economic impact on ICH and everything else with tourism, that what happens with tourism is that water supplies are diminished, and sometimes there's severe water shortages in tourism places, and there's also loss of local transportation. I know there's an example from Scotland in the Isle of Skye where people were trying to get emergency vehicles through, but there was too much traffic, so you can imagine that there are very serious impacts then. So there was some infrastructure damage that was occurring. So what they did in Hoi An was to try and do things which were ecologically friendly. So, for example, using electrical vehicles for tourists, widening roads, and improving the waste management practices. So to say a little bit about over-tourism again, it's a very serious and a growing problem in many parts of the world. Unaffordability of housing, because of short-term rentals, repurposing of places, of homes and businesses for tourism. And there's a loss of a sense of place, the experience of place. And again, ICH is not only elements that you can look at in sort of a taxonomic sense, this is ICH, this is ICH, it's also the experience of a place. That's part of heritage, the sense of place. And when too many tourists around, that sense of place is damaged. And there's not a sense of ownership, there's not a sense of connection to a place because of tourism. And Venice is a particularly dramatic case. There was not what's known as the Ven exit, where long-term residents moved away, and the local population of Venice declined. It was 175,000 in the 1970s, under 50,000 today. So that's over less than a third of the people who lived in Venice 50 years ago are living them today, which is, it's a city which is really taken over to tourism in so many ways, and Venetians who'd been there for many generations are no longer living there. There are measures that Venice are taking to curb over tourism. So there's a prohibition on local cruise ships for entering the local waterways. There's a limit of 25 persons per tour group, although I read that that's not necessarily working because a tour group can split into different sections, and a €5 fee for day visitors. And there's some question if that's working as well. But communities are trying to address this over tourism crisis. How do you protect places which are important for a community? Did I miss one? No. Okay. So this has been a particular strategy in Native communities, indigenous communities in different parts of the world. They've developed approaches for restricting access and protecting their sacred sites. Luru, which you see here, used to be called Ayers something. In Australia, it's located in a national park. And tourists would climb it all the time. This is very disturbing to the Aboriginal people in Australia, in this part of Australia, Central Australia. And for many decades, the Aboriginal communities asked that climbing by tourists of Uluru be prohibited. Finally, in 2019, because the federal officials in Australia agreed to it and what the Aboriginal leaders wanted, they banned the climbing. And other examples of indigenous groups controlling tourism include in North America, where they're sharing authority in the management and the interpretation of sacred sites. So you have a national monument where the direction and interpretation is carried out by the park rangers and the interpreter people as well as the Native people. And this is especially important when there's a grave site with the burial grounds. Among the Hopi Indians in Arizona, in the United States, they have a comprehensive approach to restricting access and protecting back regions. So we go with back regions again from intrusion by tourists. So tourists can attend some, but not all, of the ceremonies in the Hopi country. They're prohibited from making photographs, video, or audio recordings, as well as they can't sketch or take notes. So my family went to the Hopi reservation about 20 years ago or so, and we were met by a guide, and it was a local guide that had to take us around, and she said there were certain mesas are these structures that we find in the Southwest, that they're natural features that where the Hopi live, that there were some we couldn't go to, and we were guided by an approach which was very much of the Hopi people. And there's education of tourists about how to behave appropriately. So the Sami, which is an indigenous group that is found in Finland, Norway, and Sweden, and also in Russia, the Sami parliament, they have a legislative body in Finland. They develop principles for responsible and ethically sustainable tourism. And a quote from them, that they have this statement that they made to terminate tourism exploiting Sami culture, eliminate incorrect information about the Sami distributed through tourism, and a purpose to safeguard the traditions and educate tourism about their culture. So they're really taking very strong control. I remember I was in northern Finland, again, it's about 20 years ago too, and I met with the head of a museum in northern Finland, and he said, people coming from all over Europe, they want homestays, they want to be in ceremonies, and it's just overwhelming. So here you have a very small community, maybe 5, 6, 7,000 Sami in Finland, and they're overwhelmed by tourism. And in the principles of the Sami about tourism, they say that they must pay attention to domestic privacy, the sanctity of the home, guaranteed by the law, stay away from these places which are private places. And they say the reindeer fences in their properties, don't go near them. And people have to do their herding of reindeer undisturbed by tourists. they call it grazing peace, which means that reindeer herders are allowed to practice their livelihood without significant outside disruption, such as human activity within grazing grounds. So tourists are forbidden from being in these areas where reindeers are herded. I had another slide, which unfortunately didn't come along with this, but I was in Gamcheon, which is in a community in Busan in South Korea. I was there last week, and an image I was going to show you was that it said, "Please respect the privacy of our community. Don't go in the homes don't go to the places where people live." It's a sign where this is the tourism zone, and beyond there is not the tourism zone. You shouldn't go into these streets, these roads, and enjoy our community. It's very welcoming within these tourist zone, which has views of these vernacular houses. And Gamcheon is also notable because the members of the community in Gamcheon make decisions in a participatory, inclusive way about the direction of tourism. So sustainable tourism benefits from systematic planning. And planning by outside experts has to involve collaboration with local stakeholders from government, from the private sector, from ICH practitioners, et cetera, ICH bearers. And so the multifaceted systematic pathways towards ICH planning, with planning towards sustainability of ICH. And again, it's not just element specific. I think that there's a real kind of the whole UNESCO system is so centered on elements, but it has to be done in association with other social and cultural factors. So ICH safeguarding with planning should be part of a comprehensive approach to address, to mitigate, and prevent damage to tourism that's out of control. So Hoi An in Vietnam it's a World Heritage Site, and it was an ideal place for a plan by the UNESCO Asia Pacific Office in 2008, which was carried out closely in collaboration with the stakeholders in the community. The UNESCO plan included a wide varieties of kinds of ICH, and I think it's really to be noted that this wasn't done by an ICH entity. It was done by a World Heritage Site associated space and conducted by the UNESCO office there. So here's a list of the ICH that was included in the plan as needing safeguarding and what was researched: music, dance, games, ceramics, folk beliefs and religious practices, woodworking and restoration skills, tailoring. I have a couple of shirts that I got in Hoi An. Maritime traditions, rituals, festivals, games, foodways, and performing arts. And again, looking at ICH in a larger way, not just as an element, family and village relationships were viewed as ICH. Again, more than as just kinds of elements in a UNESCO listing. So there was a massive increase in tourism in Hoi An, went from 158,000 in 1997 to 1,000,005 in 2011. So there's social disruption, loss of traditional occupations, really serious strains in the infrastructure, and damage to both the tangible and intangible heritage. So this report, which I recommend reading, and again I have it in my references here, included these factors. Tourism became the main focus of the economy. While there were new opportunities for employment, the young men who came from fishermen families, and fishing was a mainstay of the economy, they became cooks or bartenders or waiters. They would make more money there. The cost of living rose, and the prices for everyday things that only tourists could afford to pay. Motorcycle taxis are the main way that people get around in Hoi An, and they became geared to tourists rather than local residents. They were too expensive. Neighborhoods became gentrified. They catered to tourism rather than the local needs. Historic homes were now used for commercial purposes, similar to what I mentioned in Venice. And local residents moved outside of the ancient town, city center, to outlying areas. Poor families, which were living on the beach and on dune land, were displaced by resorts and luxury hotel developments. It's a big tourist center, and it's along the sea. Rituals became practiced for the entertainment of tourists rather than for spiritual purposes. Everyday life sorts of activities became presented as staged entertainment and at times which were not culturally appropriate, so they lost their cultural function. There were local concerns about inappropriate dress, bathing suits in places where people shouldn't be wearing just that, shorts, et cetera, I guess, in temples, and inappropriate dress on the beach. I don't think there were bathing suits worn on the beach, but the dress was inappropriate there. There were spaces for worship, which was used in stores, and now the stores were entirely used for commercial purposes. The values of the cultures changed with greater materialism and shift from family-centered and community-focused. Remember, I said that's ICH behavior. And there was a scarcity of wood, which is used for traditional buildings. So here are some of the solutions that were recommended and implemented in Hoi An. There was a restriction on vehicles in the historic quarter. There was a minimization of the visual impact of modern infrastructure. So the antennas, which sort of were an unpleasant feature of the ancient town, went underground. There was traditional cooling instead of AC. There was development encouraged outside of the historic core while maintaining the traditional neighborhoods in Old City outside of the view of tourists. So when I visited Hoi An, I guess it was 2015 or so, 2014, about 8 or 9 years ago, I met with some people who were officials involved in tourism and restoration, and they took me to a neighborhood where an area right a block or two from the ancient center of the ancient town, where they were restoring a traditional building. So although people moved out of the city center, there was still like a presence of people who had traditionally been in those neighborhoods. And there's heritage education for students in traditional crafts, as I mentioned, with Pottery Village, and training and restoration. There were over, at the time I visited 10 years ago, so there were over 90 local restoration workers. So more solutions that they had were there were workshops and apprenticeships in the skills in woodworking, bringing woodworking back. By 2008, there were 18 wood carving and 10 boat building enterprises in Hoi An. So those are traditional occupations that returned. They did new roads, street lining, and drainage systems, again, to address the infrastructure issues. There were new regulations restricting karaoke bars, hostess bars, bikini selling, and hair salons in which women served men. So I'm going to close with some suggestions or recommendations and guideposts for sustainable ICH tourism. So first of all, community self-determination is important, just summing up. With determination by the community about the direction of tourism, there's control of the market and quality control that communities can set guidelines and restrictions which make sure there's appropriate behavior by tourism. Limitations and restrictions on access are of great importance in places where communities don't want intrusion, especially sacred places. Again, we can be cultural brokers, giving access to resources. We can assist tourism, communities in tourism based on that are experiencing tourism about ways to do it appropriate, and again, get out of the way when we need to, when we should. And this must be collaborative. We must involve multiple types of stakeholders. So we should involve government, we should involve the private sector, bearers, and NGOs, obviously. And we have to recognize that ICH will typically, most all the time, change in form, content, and cultural meaning. I reflected on this these last few days while I've been here, because there's some highly traditional practices that are presented to tourism in Jeonju. And so there's been a really great effort at preservation. But nevertheless, I think as we saw with the performances, those who were on the cultural tours, that there's a framing, there was a condensation that was presented to us, and I think happens for the tourists. And even with perhaps the most traditional crafts, the way they're framed and interpreted it's a kind of adaptation. They might be practiced very locally, but presenting them to tourists puts them in a new framework, a new interpretive context. And so these changes can be beneficial, they can revitalize, and they can be damaged, and often they can be both. And again, tourism, adaptations of ICH for tourism can include increased opportunities for practice, whether it's for crafts or performance traditions, new opportunities for marketing, and increased consciousness, increased awareness of the importance of heritage. And I think We see that here in the city as well. And a few other guideposts, remembering that tourism is often intrusive, damages the community's sense of place and presence, can do a lot of damage to traditional gathering places. And again, we can be involved in front region presentations that redirect from the back region to the place where tourists gather with tourist zones, tourist zones, but present them in ways that are deeply grounded in the traditional context of practice. As ICH practitioners, I think we're professionally equipped to develop these non-intrusive practices. Research on ICH tourism, and there's a lot of research on tourism and heritage and tourism. A lot of it is really quite negative and deconstructive. Nevertheless, there's information that we can extract from it, especially studies which are over the long term and longitudinal, which follow tourism over a period of time. We saw that in a way with the David Greenwood study of Arabia. So even when these studies are highly critical and cynical, and I think those of us who know critical heritage studies know that there's some critical heritage scholars who are quite negative about ICH and certainly about tourism, there's information which we can extract. We can use them even though they might be negative, and that can enable sustainable ICH tourism. And finally, I want to say something about authenticity. So, and I want to say this in the beginning, that NGOs are in a position to take the lead in sustainable tourism because UNESCO has been very reluctant to be involved in tourism. Head of the Living Heritage Unit 10 years ago said, we don't do tourism, we don't want to do tourism. And there's been there was a recent study about the economic dimensions of ICH that did deal with tourism. There's some work being done by UNESCO, but there's so much that we can do because we're close to the ground. We study tourism, we work practitioners, so NGOs are really important. And authenticity is another word which UNESCO ICH doesn't like to use. I think part of it is because of its association with the built environment and the sense that authenticity means that it's kept in a pure form from its original form. There are multiple meanings of authenticity. One of the meanings of authenticity is genuineness as subjectively experienced. So it means a member of a community experiences something and said, this is the real thing, this is authentic, this is a category of thought, this is a category of language, and it's legitimate. You know, in the variety of meanings of authenticity, it can be verisimilitude. It's something that looks like the real thing and is recreated in a faithful way. It can be the original instance of a practice, or it can be something which is experienced as something true and believable and authentic. And so we should aim for authentic experiences, authentic in that sense of the genuine and something that's experienced in a way that's faithful to the culture, in ways that communities want to represent themselves. So authenticity follows from how community self-representation. It follows from the need to foster ICH safeguarding and the need to maintain cultural integrity. So I think we should return to the idea of authenticity, but use it in a way that reflects our ideals and our values for cultural integrity, collaboration with community, enabling ICH safeguarding and communities' ability and need to represent themselves. So thank you for your attention.
네, 로버턴 바론 교수의 기조 강연이 있었습니다. 무형유산과 지속가능한 관광, 전략, 모델 및 함정이라는 제목의 기조 강연이었습니다. 무형유산계 이쪽 전문가 파트에서는 무형유산과 관광은 별개의 문제, 오히려 관광을 좀 더 부정적으로 인식해왔던 경향이 있었지만 실제 무형유산을 전승하고 있는 지역의 사람들은 돈이 창출되지 않으면은 그 마을을 떠날 것이고 그 마을을 떠나게 되면 더욱더 무형유산은 전승되기가 어렵다는 것이죠. 그래서 피할 수 없이 관광이든 뭐하든 무형유산을 가지고 어떤 부들을 비즈니스를 연결시키는 것은 피할 수 없는 길이다라고 할 수가 있겠습니다. 그런 측면에서 이제는 우리가 부정적으로 인식하고 우리하고는 별개의 문제다라고 관광을 치부할 것이 아니라 어떻게 하면 이것이 지속 가능한 공동체가 함께 상생할 수 있는 방안을 마련할 수 있을까? 그 모델에 우리가 비전을 제시하는 것이 또 전문가의 역할이 아니겠는가라는 취지에서 선생님께서 플래닝과 전략과 계획들을 제시해 주신 것 같습니다. 다시 한번 로버트 바론 교수에게 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.
Welcome back, everybody, to this afternoon's session. This is our first full presentation and commenting session for the forum. So we have, this session is the mutual influence between ICH and tourism. And we have presenters Martin Andrade Perez, UNESCO ICH facilitator, and Tamara Nikolic-Jeric from Croatia, the Batana Museum, Eco Museum, will also be presenting. We have commentaries from Han Seng-mi, Professor Yonsei University, and Bai Umsik Suk, Professor Hankook University of Foreign Studies. So first of all, we will have Martin presenting on the web dossier on intangible cultural heritage and sustainable tourism, a fantastic tool which, if you haven't looked at after Martin's presentation, I sincerely hope you will. Martin, if you would like to come up.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank our hosts, the Center of Intangible Cultural Studies, especially Han-Hee and Xinhua, because we are having a fantastic time here, and the past days, the previous days were really, really great, so thank you very much. And also the ICHCAP and the city of Jeonju for hosting us, and all the team who has made this possible. So I am Martin Andrade Perez. I am from Colombia. It's important to talk about my positionality here. I work with an NGO in Colombia called the Fundación Erigaye. So we don't represent the community, we don't represent the civil society, but we support communities and civil society with tools, with methodologies for safeguarding cultural heritage. That's our work. I think that here the Center for Intangible Cultural Studies may do the same. So what we do is to support, we try to think about tools for communities in Colombia who work with intangible heritage. I am also a UNESCO ICH facilitator. That means that the framework of my work is the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Heritage of 2003, that many of you may know, which is this convention that has made more than 20 years ago, and I think it's the framework of all of us. And I am member of the working group research of the ICH NGO Forum. So the ICH NGO Forum is an organization that gathers the NGOs that have an accreditation for giving advisory services to the committee. So Robert Barron, who was here previously, is the chair of the executive board, but we have many members of this ICH NGO Forum. The Center of Intangible Cultural Studies also is part of the forum, and it's a very active member of the forum. So I am a member of the working group research. We do lots of activities. We try to be active in many fields and to think about how to safeguard intangible cultural heritage around the world. So in 2020, on December 13, we organized a seminar. We organized a seminar online, a symposium on intangible cultural heritage and sustainable tourism. It was supposed to be done in Jamaica, but for COVID, we couldn't do it in Jamaica. It was online. It was a bit paradigmatic that we had to talk online, and at times where tourism cannot happen. Tourism was a standstill in this moment. So we were talking about tourism, but tourism was not a reality there. And we didn't know what was going to happen with tourism. That was good also because we had the time to reflect, to talk about tourism, to think, to take some some space to think about tourism. But we didn't know what was going to happen. At the end, now we are kind of what we were calling the new reality, but it's like the reality, and tourism is a reality again. So at that moment, we were thinking especially about the necessity, about the needs of intangible heritage and tourism, or intangible heritage tourism. We were just thinking about these needs, what to do related to tourism and intangible heritage. It's like there's a focus on the economic side and not on the safeguarding and opportunities. I think Robert already mentioned many of them. There's need to think in terms of a sustainable tourism. We need like more cases around the world. And at the end, one of our most important conclusions at that moment was that we didn't have tools that allow communities to better manage this relationship between tourism and intangible cultural heritage. So that's how the web dossier on intangible cultural heritage and sustainable tourism was born. After many reflections, we were working on this. There's also another background. There's a lot of people who was already working on tourism here and there. There was a main group of people who was already working in Europe on this project on intangible cultural heritage in museums. Was 5 countries around Europe, and tourism was not the focus of this project, but it was there already. They were talking about tourism in some way. And in 2020, there was this special number of the magazine Volkskunde, which is a Flemish magazine for intangible heritage, and it was a special number about intangible heritage and tourism. So we had this base for thinking about what to do in intangible heritage and tourism. In both projects, many colleagues that are part of this working group were working. Many of them are here. But we remember especially our colleague Albert van der Zijden, who was the main promoter of this web dossier, and who was a very good friend. So most of this work is dedicated to him because he was the main figure behind this web dossier at that moment. Beyond the lack of tools I mentioned earlier, what were the reasons for developing this toolkit, or why we were working on this? I will talk to you more about the process for doing this toolkit. Why did we feel it was, and it continues to be of great importance for those of us who work in safeguarding ICH, and for those who work in the tourism industry today? Solving this simple question can help us to understand a bit the structure of the toolkit and why it's there. The relation between intangible cultural heritage and tourism has always been problematic. Robert also mentioned many problems, but from the moment a musical or a dance tradition becomes a product that people travel to see, this music or this dance loses a part of its ritual celebratory character to become a product. The day a craft begins to be sold to visitors instead of being used in traditional practices, that craft takes another meaning. Or when traditional cuisine begins to be the attraction of a place where children prefer to go to McDonald's for lunch, culinary traditions start to be made for the others, and not for the family and not for the friends. In general, when intangible cultural heritage is converted into tourism, something changes in that heritage. However, between the people who were there, we were all working on intangible heritage, safeguarding intangible heritage around the world. We have seen that tourism can have both good and bad consequences, as we already said previously. Just as it can destroy the essence of a tradition, it can also allow another tradition to survive. So it's bad, but it's good. So it's a very problematic relationship at the end. It can also allow the people who is behind these traditions to survive, which is already very important. Sometimes they live for this, so that's already something. Uh, People, but already Robert told this, and I think we will repeat this today and tomorrow. People is traveling more and more for having experiences, not for visiting sites, but more and more we see this like experiential tourism around the world. So they want to live like the tradition of the others. They want to see how it is. They want to make crafts themselves. They want to learn to play an instrument, an old instrument that nobody plays, but some people wants to do that. They want to perform rituals. So that's a change in the last 30 years in the field of tourism. But we lack figures to know exactly what's the economic contribution of the ICH to tourism is. We don't know what's the real contribution around the world. We lack data to know how many traditions have been dramatically transformed by tourism. We don't know. We don't understand very well this transformation around the world. It's happening, but we don't know how much. We don't have indicators that would allow us to know how many ICH elements have been saved thanks to tourism. Also, we were talking previously about indicators. We don't have them in tourism and intangible heritage, and they are very difficult to build as well. Precisely for that reason, one of the main parts of this toolkit was to solve that question. Why and how can tourism enhance or endanger ICH safeguarding? So we want to just give some clues about each one of these questions so everybody can understand this, like in a easy language and with like practical cases. Not all the answers are there because the answers are really complex in most of the cases. It's in a discussion about the advantages and disadvantages of tourism, we realized that the first thing we had to do was to give as many keys as possible to help answer these questions. Why it is attractive to tourism, how does tourism impact tangible cultural heritage safeguarding, all these questions that already Robert was talking about. How can tourism endanger intangible heritage? How can tourism enhance and support safeguarding actions? So in the toolkit, we are trying to solve these questions. Of course, we were it's not our own answers to most of these questions, even if we have been working on this. We have taken like many academic works. We have, for example, one citation is the book of Maria Gravari Barbas about heritage and tourism from 2020. There's another article like from the anthropology of tourism from Jeonju and Noel Salazar from 2015. There's a lot of bibliography. We all were like looking for these cases, for this bibliography, but we also have like concrete cases, which is maybe like the most important part of the web dossier, that it's based on practical cases, so everybody can understand how it's working. Of course, there is a previous part to this, like the part 2 about the basic concepts behind this, because not everyone knows what's intangible cultural heritage. We are talking about ICH. We are assuming that everybody knows what this intangible heritage or ICH is, or living heritage, but maybe not everyone know, and especially the tourism operators, they don't know what's ICH or what we are talking about. We don't know, not everybody knows what's safeguarding, which are like the actions taken to ensure the viability of intangible heritage. What form can these safeguarding actions can take? And tourism is even like a concept that sometimes is not easy to understand. So, and it has many, many forms. So it's also important to explain this. And how does heritage relate to tourism? It's also another question that we wanted to solve in some way. So we had lots of questions and thinking about the tourism operators, thinking about like the communities themselves. What do they need for thinking about the relationship between tourism and intangible cultural heritage? We included also like some other concepts and other tools, like more in deep, and especially sustainable tourism, but also what safeguarding intangible heritage through sustainable tourism means, what what does sustainable tourism look like in the context of intangible heritage? I will come to this later again. And we included here what organizations such as UNESCO or UN Tourism are saying and are recommending about this. This was also like a, we are also included like a part of resources. I mean, which are the international documents and policies about these, the tools and guidelines that already exist, the articles, the books, the media, the lexicon. So we have made this as comprehensive as possible, including all the documents we knew or that can be really interesting for this. But I will go back to the previous one. I will go back to this idea of sustainable tourism, which is like basically also like, I should have started with this idea of sustainable tourism and not simply, why sustainable and not simply tourism for the elaboration of the toolkit. It was like, there's a lot of definitions. No? I mean, this is like the definition of UN tourism. Tourism that takes full account of its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment, and host communities. So there's many definitions. This is like the official definition, but we were thinking about the many definitions, and we wrote that sustainable tourism can protect and regenerate the natural environment while also contributing to the safeguarding and revitalization of intangible heritage. That's maybe the difference between sustainable tourism and tourism. Sustainable tourism is the tourism that can be good for intangible cultural heritage. So if you, again, I am going back to this part 4 again and thinking about this question about what does sustainable tourism look like in the context of intangible heritage, which is other very important part of the toolkit, which are some kind, if you see the question, the answers to that questions are some kind of principles that we are kind of adapting when talking about intangible heritage and tourism. So if you see like each one of the answers are developed in the toolkit. So the first one is that sustainable tourism follows ethical principles, and it's like the ethical principles of the communities. Sustainable tourism is community-led, so it's always the community who is leading sustainable tourism in these cases. It creates benefits for local economies. It's just another source of income. It's not the only source of income, but we are talking about diversified sources of income. And we were, when we were thinking about this, remember that we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So we know now which is the problem, or being based only on tourism. It's not the same to do planning for safeguarding intangible heritage, and planning tourism is not the same, so we need to think about that again also. And it is environmentally sustainable, even if that can have a lot of problems later, especially for the elements and the traditions of ICH. Many of them can be very difficult for our environment. So these are some kind of principles. Again, each one of them is explained in the toolkit, and I invite you to see them. Maybe for understanding this, also one of the main parts and for one of the more important parts of the toolkit is this part about examples. So we have like case studies that were collected via desk research, and we have a group of experiences from the field. We don't have enough, or we feel that we don't have enough, so we are still collecting many of them. So we have 18 from desk research, and we have like 8 which are collected through an open call for sharing experiences. I would like again to invite you for sharing our experiences. There are like experiences from all over the world, from all over the continents. We don't have experiences from Korea, for example, so it would be great now that we know that there are so many things happening in Korea. We already knew, but it's also an invitation, so you can include something here. So the the main question here was, can tourism be a safeguarding measure? So if we see some of these examples, the answer is yes, it can. But it happens always when the communities themselves are behind tourism planning. So this year I was telling you we will continue developing this. We will open the call for new cases again. So I invite you to please include your cases if you have some. I will end this presentation with this last part, which is what we called first steps to action. And it's just a set of recommendations. Again, it's recommendations because all the cases are different. But we were thinking about which should be the general objectives and guidelines for ICH tourism. And we were thinking about this some kind of checklist about planning for like a tourism which is centered on intangible cultural heritage. So we just designed this checklist. And also a list about how to work together, or how to work in partnership when planning ICH tourism. Again, these are some recommendations. Okay, we were thinking which should be these general objectives for ICH tourism. So again, I think we will repeat this all the time. So the first objective should be the involvement of the community. So we were not thinking that tourism should be an objective, but one of the objectives should be that the community is involved. Safeguarding intangible heritage should be one of the objectives as well when we are doing tourism. There must be also a plan. I mean, there's need of a design, of a concrete design, and a strategic design of the offer. Another objective should be the respect of sustainable development objectives and approaches. Also to respect the value and meanings of the ICH elements, of the traditions, of the practices. Also avoid over-commercialization and the contextualization. I will not explain here what this means. I will not extend on this. Already Robert already told us something about that, and I think the other presenters will show something about this. Always give back to the communities, which is also something very important, and recognize and respect the rights and practices of the communities. And we also had like the checklist that I was talking about, which is when we are planning, what to do when we are planning intangible cultural heritage tourism. First, ensure that the viewer communities are leaders in the development of the tourism products. Not just that they are participating, but try to make them the leaders of this tourism products. Not just participants or people who is there guiding, but they should try, or we should try to make them the leaders of this. Always assess, always evaluate the impacts of tourism on intangible heritage, or try as much as possible to assess these impacts and manage risks and threats, which is something that we still need more tools for managing risks and threats when we are working with living heritage, but that's something that we need to do. Again, respect the rights of communities, respect the rights of communities, which is maybe it should be the first one. It should be like maybe the first part of our checklist. Also, always think about how the communities are recognizing their intangible heritage to ensure that the viability, value, and meaning is recognized. Respect also that intangible heritage is changing all the time, is dynamic, and respect what the communities want to do. Even if sometimes we feel that the communities are doing something that is wrong, if all the community wants to do something, maybe it's for a reason. Maybe when we come from abroad or we are external, maybe the community don't want something anymore. They don't want to keep practicing a tradition, and that can happen. Okay, how to deal with that, how to respect that is something that I think we need to learn about. always inform the others, inform third parties, inform the tourists, the tourist operators, like the local governments. Always keep them informed. Promote sustainable development through tourism development. That's also very like basic, and especially now with all this sustainable development paradigm. Also, always ensure that the local communities are they are having direct benefit from the revenues, which is, it doesn't happen always, so that's also very important. And always try to think about how to innovate for safeguarding intangible heritage. Tourism, as we have seen with the examples that Robert presented previously, innovation can be always important when safeguarding and when doing tourism with intangible cultural heritage. That's it. I just want to finish with some credits here because it's a big group. Here we have many of the people who work on the web dossier. We have Robert, Tamara, Severin, John. We all Leonce, and also, I mean, we were many of us. I am only one member of this big group of people who was working here. We are all from different parts of the world. Especially, I would like to just recognize it's the workshop Intangible Heritage and the director of this organization, Jorain Nering, who was leading the whole process all the time. So it's also a very important recognition for us. But especially for us, the toolkit, working on this was very important to show us that we can work together on ICH projects. So that's not always the case. No? I mean, it's like people from different parts of the world trying to see which are the common problems or which could be the common solutions in the tourism cases. Please, there's like a problem here because there's a problem with the website, but this toolkit is available online, so everybody can go through the toolkit. Each one of these parts is developed. The toolkit is dynamic, it's changing all the time, so we can change it. So if there is something that you don't like, if there is something that you think that can be improved, please tell us. If you want to include cases, that's the point. It should be changing all the time. Just look for ICH NGO Forum. The toolkit, the web dossier is online there. And as I am telling, it's changing all the time. So that's the idea. It's like intangible cultural heritage that is changing all the time. Thank you very much.
We have a commentator for this, Han Seng-mi. Are you? So if I can hand over to you.
Well, this is a photo from a long time ago. But I somehow look similar to that. Yeah. Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be invited as a discussant for this very interesting and stimulating forum. And I didn't know that there were simultaneous translations, so I will just go on with what I have prepared. I was incredibly stimulated by the fact that there is such a thing called web dossier for the ICH and tourism. And I think I'm going to use it a lot for my class as well. My first question, by the way, is that I think the doctor who gave the primary opening speech mentioned that UNESCO is not particularly interested in delving into this issue of tourism, and ICH NGO Forum is very important, therefore. That's what he, I think, briefly mentioned. So I was wondering, these incredibly exciting web dossier projects and UNESCO, what's the relationship between the two? And I read a book by Dr. Meskel, who very critically analyzed the UNESCO function, that it's too much government oriented, and professionals' advice is really necessary in order to make it actually work for the real goal of what UNESCO has to achieve. So does it have anything to do with that kind of issues? That's my first question. And my second question is, you mentioned mentioned that this web dossier is a toolkit for the communities to manage the relationship between tourism and cultural heritage, and and I think it's really great that since there has not been enough information of tourism's impact on ICH and ICH vice versa, ICH's impact on tourism. So these efforts to gather information and create guidelines and toolkits was very impressive. But the paper that I got actually did not mention in detail about what those toolkits actually were. And I'm very glad today that you mentioned about the checklist. I like the checklist most, by the way, that the community should be the leader of the development. They have to be engaged in all sorts of this tourism development plan and everything. So part of that, I was interested in, because in some of those web dossier that I read, because after I read your article, I read this web dossier. In one of those web dossier, I found mentioning about, in order to protect the interests of the bearer communities, there has to be a lot of legal measures to protect their interests as far as possible, including their intellectual property rights. So I'm kind of curious and was wondering what's the forefront of the debates regarding that aspects in terms of the tourism and ICH debate. So that's my second question. And third question is related to the second one, is that the communities should be the leaders of this tourism development. And I think all of you probably already know that Sado Island, the Sado mining in Japan, was recently enlisted as the UNESCO site. Although it's not intangible, but there are tangible and intangible all related. And when I went there as part of this Japan Studies group's group visits, I was very struck by the fact that the Sado people actually were not much interested in the conflicts between Korea and Japan or whatsoever. They were just interested in attracting more tourists. And therefore, they were very happy that it was enlisted. Even when Koreans are critical, they were very happy that it was enlisted that Koreans are coming. So it was eye-opening eye-opening discovery, and they actually were very happy that Koreans are voicing criticisms about the central government's view that in the designation of this cultural heritage, there has been some women who treated these miners sexually, and these local people wanted to do something about these women who were involved in the heritage sites. But it was not included, of course. So they were very happy to see Koreans raising voices. And they were willing to cooperate with the Koreans if they want to make it an educating site. These heritage should be educating, and there has to be attitude, should be mentioned for the tourists to learn deeply about the site. And so in this case, what I found very interesting was that there is a gap between the local community's needs and desires and the central government's directions about what to stage for the tourists. And I was really surprised. These local people in Sado Island in Japan, they told us, I was very surprised that this one was not included, which was where the Koreans were working, because that's actually, I don't know whether you know this Japanese manga film, what's that? 천공의 라퓨타? It's a very famous anime, Japanese animation, and it was actually shot in Sado Island, and it's against this background of this, heritage for like selecting gold from the rock. So, and it's a huge modern, enormously, what, solemn looking relic, kind of. And these many local people thought that, wow, this is great. And then they were surprised that why this is not included, and only the Edo period is included. So my question, I guess I'm going back to the question is, yes, the communities should be the leaders of the development, but what if there is a gap between the community and the national level desires? Because the principles in the web dossier says that there has to be a good coordination between government, tourism stakeholders, and communities. So I was, the Sado Island was not something that I thought when I was actually visiting there. It was different from what I read from the newspaper. So anyway, so that's my third question. And fourth question is, I think your invitation of including Korea is a very, very exciting one. And I think Intangible Cultural Heritage Institute will be very glad to be part of it. So let's make it a kind of official invitation. Uh, and, uh, and I think, yeah, so from my own experience, Hae, the Talchum, I think it was really great because I've read about Hae Talchum, and I know that it's very famous, and I know it's a cultural heritage, but even though I have visited Hae several times, I have never seen it over there before. But because of this, this performance-oriented, ICH-driven tourism, I think, tourism tendency, they have recently created a stage for tourists who can actually go and take a look at these dances. And I was really surprised that there are these, living national treasures actually come out and do the dances as well. So where on earth can you see that? Otherwise, unless you madly click on the, tickets to see all these performances and everything. So at the local site, they are actually holding these kinds of performances I think every Saturday, twice on Saturday. And I think that's a very good example of, intangible cultural heritage being integrated into the tourism industry. And I think, there is also, the Korean performance characteristics is that they encourage audience to participate in the performance. So there are very interesting jokes, and they also collect money. They say, "Oh, it's voluntary; you don't have to pay." But nobody dare not pay when there are these kinds of, sort of encouragement. So, but they don't pay a lot, but still, it sort of helps the community to survive. So I think Korea can be part of this network. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, Martine, I think first one for you.
So thank you very much. It's like 20 questions condensed in four.
Four,
Yeah,
we
okay.
got four.
But thank you very much for your comments and your questions. Like going to the questions first, I cannot talk for UNESCO, so I don't work with UNESCO, so I cannot say how they are integrating or how they will integrate this. I know they appreciate the work of the forum, and the forum work with UNESCO, but we are just doing, when we were doing this toolkit, and all the time when we are doing this toolkit, we are not thinking about UNESCO. We are thinking about the communities. So if at some point, and we think that it will happen at some point, at UNESCO they feel it can be useful for them, and it can be like officially adapted or something, it can happen, but we don't know. We are not looking for that. And sometimes, of course, they work like not directly in tourism, but many of the projects are related to tourism. So maybe they can recommend the toolkit. We don't know, but we were not thinking about uh, like ask UNESCO to adapt this. It's not the point. So we just keep doing our work, and we try to do it as good as possible, and to have like a nice tool that everybody can use. So if UNESCO wants to use it, it's good, but we cannot ask them anything about this. I agree with you in most of the comments. For example, about like, yes, the critics of Lynn Meskel. I I get them. I was like some months ago with her talking about this, about okay, how to deal with this. She works more with world heritage, which is a bit different, but at the same, like the problems are kind of the same. She's an archaeologist at the end. But this is also very related to what you were saying about coordination, because what we included in this toolkit is, again, is like recommendations, ideal recommendations that sometimes are not easy to realize and to implement. Of course, like this gap between these many gaps, because these gaps between the communities and the governments are always very big. So for us, or at least for the NGOs, for the mediators, or for many of us, one of our tasks is to mediate between the government and the communities, and to see how to reach a common ground or common objectives, which is never easy. It's never easy. It's always a big challenge. Sometimes the communities want tourism and the government doesn't, or sometimes it's the contrary. Sometimes the government sees like the main tourist destination of a country where the communities don't want to know anything about tourism. So it's like the gentrification cases are like paradigmatic. The governments want tourism. The communities who live there, the local communities, don't want more tourism. So how to go through these challenges is something that we need to learn about. Again, it's recommendations, and it's what we think that should happen in an ideal world, but many of them cannot be adapted like this. And it's the same about like the leaders, and like is this the case in this island is like, it's great because it's a perfect case to think about this and to see, okay, how to how to work with the many interests of like the different people involved there. So I think that's the main challenge at the end, to just be able to mediate, to help, to support. I think really we should need to think first of all in the communities and what they want and what they need. And again, that's another thing that you were mentioning, like what they need and what they want. It's true that sometimes, do they know what they need? Do they know? I mean, there's many people who say that they don't know what they need. So they need this, so we have to tell them what they need. Is it true or not? I mean, all the cases are different, so it's very difficult to evaluate and to assess. So I guess we should go and see, okay, what do you really need, and try to like really work as responsible as possible in identifying these needs. And with this like good needs identification, see, okay, which is like from needs to desires, what's the difference, and then work on that. But there's like a part on the toolkit about that as well, which is also like a very, very big challenge. And then thinking about the legal framework. And all the legal frameworks are different in all the countries. So it's also difficult to evaluate, but in all our national context, we need to think our own national legal background. In these cases, there's a lot of discussions right now about ICH and intellectual property, for example. So how to deal with that? So each country has its own like legal background. Joanne has like written about this as well, about intellectual property and how to deal with that with these legal measures are like also like really something that will depend on each one of the cases. And sometimes the legal background doesn't allow to do tourism. So in these cases, what to do? So if the legal background doesn't allow to do that, so it's not possible. So think about something else, try to innovate, and it will depend always on the cases. That's it.
So that's all those questions answered. Thank you, Martin. I have a question too, but I'm going to wait and see if there are any questions from the audience. I'm assured that you are allowed to participate, and if you have a question for Martin, please raise your hand. Or not. That's why I have a question. So my question, Martin, so you've participated in depth in the web dossier and the creation and the research and creating the toolkits. And I wondered how it has affected your perception of working with tourism in an ICH context. Has it changed any of your views? Or will have hopefully informed, but are you running from the room, so to speak, metaphorically?
No, for me it was great actually, because actually what I wanted was to learn. So it was like a perfect like a space for me to learn more about tourism. And when you see some other cases from around the world, I mean, I was not involved in like looking for the cases, but what the other people was doing like about the cases was great, just looking into them, but then about the discussions and like trying to think also like outside our little bubble. Because we always, when we are talking about tourism, we always think about our national cases. What is happening here in my town, in my city, in my country, with this little community? And of course, it's what the legal framework allows, but it also depends on the reality of these communities. But when you see that so many different things are happening around the world, you see, wow, this is like really great, and we should try to be innovative when doing tourism with intangible heritage. So that's, I learned a lot, so it's just not that, but I was thinking about innovation. But innovation, I mean, innovation is like really easy to find, because I think at the end we use almost the same methodologies in our national context, but when we see in other places, there's some other things that are very innovative for like our national context. So I could follow with this a lot, but no, I will let it like that.
No, that gives us an insight. So final chance for questions before I sum up. Okay. So the web dossier, I want to follow Martin's point around Albert van der Zijden's inspiration and earlier research behind the web dossier as to create momentum at a time when UNESCO was perceiving ICH tourism relationship very much as problematic. And I think even in the short space of time the web dossier has been around, that perception is changing. So UNESCO is more open, I think, to the idea of tourism and doesn't immediately put it in the box of commodification, which I think there was a lot of that beforehand, because you've created a toolkit with research, resources, and case studies that relate closely, the UNESCO elements in many cases. So, all of them, I think. So it's demonstrating, here in depth, here is tourism and ICH working well together across both relationship. I think in terms of what you're saying, the inspiration behind it was that perception, but also not enough information, no data. So this is a start in terms of the building data, and it goes a long way to putting something on the web dossier that you can find, you can use in your research. I've certainly used it and quoted it. And there isn't enough data on the impacts of ICH and tourism and ICH. So it goes both ways. Why and how can tourism enhance or endanger ICH safeguarding? So it's not answering the questions, but it's providing resources, data on case studies to think about some of these tensions and understand where it is happening and some of the reasons around that. And the case studies are absolutely invaluable. So they're great, and hopefully if you do look at this, you'll be inspired to start adding case studies and presenting them, because that's what's going to give this sustainability as a toolkit. And why is ICH attractive to tourism? And how does tourism impact in danger and the effect on ICH safeguarding? So these are all massive questions that this web dossier is starting to unpick and provide some information around, particularly I think the policy documents of other governments, looking at the work that's been done both at national level and international between UNESCO and the UN World Tourism Organization. And again, that's raised awareness. I know some closer work with the UN and WTO came out of this project. So again, that raises awareness, not necessarily as ICH, oh, it's great, it's the next great tourism thing, but actually an understanding of what the responsibilities are around that. And I think we will all come away from this, a key takeaway is the community is at the heart of this. Community, consent, respect, they have to be in the driving seat, else it will not be sustainable. So the community needs to make its own decisions and decide when something is ready to be put into the tourism domain, because once it's out there, it's very difficult to take it back. So ensuring that viability, meaning and recognition is there to be, it's robust to be put into the public tourism context. And I've experienced that firsthand where an Indigenous community has said, we know where we are on that spectrum. We're not ready to go into the tourism side, but we know what we need to do to go there. But our decision will be when we'll do it when we're ready. And that is a key in terms of those ethical principles. Approach to it is something that comes through. It's a continuous stream through the checklist and through the recommendations. And you know, it's fairly simple, but it can be complex to implement and respect and not be carried away by that tourism picture of the perfect ICH happening in the perfect world. Because we know from experience that it's much deeper than that. So thank you, Martine. Thank you, Han. So thank you very much for your comments.
One last thing is not content related, but the toolkit is also in French. So Severin, who is here, like did most of, I think, all the translation to French, and we want to have it in more other languages. At some point we were talking about the Center of Intangible Cultural Studies here, about like the possibility of having the translation to Korean, but also to Spanish, Arabic, many other languages, so it can be available in many other languages. So that's it. Let's see, maybe in some years we will have it in Korean as well. And
Yes, definitely. Korean, I think, would be fantastic. So if you even the front pages would be great. I'm looking at you, Hanny.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're allowed to exit. Okay, we'll let you go. So we're going to move on to our second presenter of the afternoon, Tamara Nikolic, who's senior curator at the Eco Museum House of Batana, and I know she does many other things as well, and is multi-talented. So she's going to talk about living heritage meeting tourism. And picking up from the previous presentation, is it a bi-directional benefit possible? Eco Museum Batana UNESCO ICH Register of Good Safeguarding Practices, a case from Croatia. So over to you, Tamara.
Thank you, Joanne. for the kind introduction, and to our hosts for the wonderful hospitality we have been enjoying in the past days. I have to say that I have observed a very important thing in the last days that I think is crucial for the development of sustainable tourism practices with the view to safeguarding ICH, and that is the respect that the community has for its bearers and for its traditions. I think we all have seen that, how the community appreciates ICH bearers here in Jeonju, and I believe it is on respect that sustainability is based on. Before starting the presentation, I would just like to add to what Joanne has said, that besides being a UNESCO ICH facilitator, curator, and cultural anthropologist, working with many different communities on developing their safeguarding measures and projects, I am also native of Rovinj and part of the community I'm presenting today. My grandfather was a fisherman using Batana boat, and he was actually one of the first people using the boat for transporting tourists to the nearby islands in the late 50s, beginning 60s. So we see the long-lasting connection between Batana and tourism, which started as a natural process, as an organic relationship, following the idea of the changing and adapting nature of ICH in response to natural and social dynamics. Back then, it was really difficult to earn a livelihood. So when tourism started to come to Rovinj, they just innovated and started using the boat also for transporting tourists to the islands. In this presentation, I will introduce the understanding I have and we in the Batana have on the relation between ICH and tourism, present Ecomuseum Batana and its relation to sustainable tourism, the opportunities for bidirectional benefit deriving from our experience, and open up the question and show our examples on mitigating risks. So I would like to start with a statement by Marco Aimé. Be it successful or less, tourism is a form of encounter where a local hosts a tourist, generating relational dynamics between the mentioned individuals, often pertaining to two different cultures. If understanding living heritage as an integral part of people's life, it implies that hosts, as well as visiting communities, are in a way or another connected to different intangible cultural heritage. And the link between tourism and ICH lies exactly in this encounter between the host and the community. As the communities, groups, and individuals practicing or cherishing different aspects of living heritage are crucial for its transmission, it is them who also decide on the safeguarding measures, including also whether or not to participate in tourism activities. I think it is important to say what do we understand by tourism, tourists. The UNWTO definition is quite large, and it includes various types of people traveling between countries. I think for our purpose, it is really important to understand tourists, and it is the case here in this presentation, as people traveling for leisure, educational purposes, as well as health or business, but if their visit includes aspects of leisure activity and meeting host. Why is this important? Until recently, and these encounters were mostly oriented towards cultural and natural heritage sites, including museums and monuments, and the encounters were communities were rarely involved, except as workers in the hospitality sector. The diversification of tourist offer, and we have heard a lot about experiential tourism, the diversification of the needs also of the many tourists, the billions that are traveling, actually opened up a possibility also for ICH. there are many challenges we have seen, but I wanted to start with the challenges that were identified through the survey on ICH and tourism in 2012, defining the three crucial challenges within the dynamic relationship between ICH and tourism. The first one being the need to contribute to the identification, protection, and safeguarding of ICH through tourism development. So this is the prime concern. To develop true partnerships between communities and the tourism and heritage sectors, which can only occur if all sides develop a genuine appreciation for each other's aspirations and values. So respect and understanding. The third one being the tourism stakeholder need to acquire awareness of cultural heritage management practices, while heritage managers on the other side must endeavor to comprehend the complex phenomenon of tourism and its modus operandi. So I think it is clear that actually when we, within the Eco-Museum House of Batana, talk about these relations, and I need to say that not only did my grandfather work in the tourism sector, if I may say so, it is also that from 2004, when Eco-Museum Batana was established, in our basic act, we stated that we want to safeguard maritime heritage, both tangible and intangible, and develop sustainable tourism practices in 2004. So we are celebrating 20 years this year. Tomorrow we have a big celebration on the occasion of the 20th anniversary. So I have to say that in these 20 years we really have come a long way. Why is this possible? I think it is possible because Eco-Museum Batana, and you see that I have put who is Eco-Museum Batana, it is its people. It is a community-based heritage practice. It was established by a community of people that were concerned with the status of the Batana boat. It is a very simple traditional fishing boat, but it was disappearing from the harbor, and there were no masters anymore, just a few left. So they decided to start a project and to see how can they revitalize this practice. It is rooted in its territory. You see here, so this is actually a building. So Rovinj is a city that was built on the rocks on the shore of the sea, and the Batana boat is flat bottom, so it operates in very shallow water. So it's really important to understand that not only a building where our objects are, but the sea that where Batana operates is part also of the Eco-Museum. It is dedicated to the safeguarding of Rovinj's maritime heritage, as I said, and it's based on a holistic approach to culture. What does it mean for us? It means that not only the construction of the boat, which was the first idea, we need to safeguard the process of making the boat, but very wide and different activities were then included, because they realized from the very beginning, if they just build the boat, but then they don't use it, it doesn't serve for anything. So fishing traditions, singing, fisherman tradition, gastronomy connected with the fishing, all of these different elements were incorporated in the concept of the Eco-Museum, and I will now briefly show you how. Before showing you that, I have to just say that in 2016, and this is really, of course, important for us, Eco-Museum Batana was inscribed in the UNESCO ICH Register of Good Safeguarding Practices. And I always like to emphasize the decision of the committee. The committee selects community project of safeguarding the living culture of Rovinj, the Batana Eco-Museum, as a program, project, or activity best reflecting the principles and objectives of the Convention, and commends the submitting state for highlighting the successful link between revitalizing an element of intangible cultural heritage and sustainable development with an impact on an entire community. So we see that starting from this very elementary boat and one element, we really did show that through the Eco-Museum practice, we made an impact on the entire community. This is quite a bold statement, but actually it did make an impact for some people more in terms of social and economic benefits, but also for the entire community in this sense of belonging and identity building. So since the beginning, the key task was to apply the innovative ecomuseological principles as means of safeguarding and development of sustainable cultural tourism, as I already said, but also develop participatory heritage management aiming at strengthening the cultural competency of the community concerned. We have heard now how important it is to make the communities leaders of their projects. Eco-Museum Batana, I can say, follows this recommendation, and actually all the people that are part of the NGO are part of the community. There is always some professionals involved in terms of administering or promoting the project, but on local level, it is always the community that decides and leads the project. Eco-Museum Batana has 5 different elements, I would say. So the first one is the Documentation and Interpretation Center. This is our new permanent exhibition. We have a collection of traditional fishing tools. And we use the center as a starting point for visitors to learn about our maritime heritage and then introduce them to other spaces that we manage. And the second space, which is emblematic, I would say, for Eco-Museum Batana, is the Spaccio Matica. It is a local tavern where we serve traditional food and have singing performances. It was integrated in the Eco-Museum just 1 year after the opening of the Interpretation Center, the local exhibition. The third one is the shipyard. Unfortunately, we have lost almost all the shipyards, so there is only just one active historical shipyard. And I'm happy to say that this year we have made an agreement with the municipality, and part of this shipyard has been given to Eco-Museum Batana to make a workshop there for building of the boats. Usually it was done in houses, in the lower parts of the houses, but when Batana started, there were no places where to build Batana boats. So we did it in open space, also as a tourism demonstration and attraction during summer in front of our Eco-Museum. The construction of Batana is included in the National Register of Intangible Cultural Heritage, as well as the singing and the fishing traditions. The fourth element is the regatta of traditional boats. Also, traditional sailing is the fourth element that Batana was active in inventorying and proposing for inscription on the national inventory. The last one that I want to present is the Batana thematic routes. This one maybe sounds most touristic of all, even though you have seen that each of these elements is really developed not only to serve the purposes of safeguarding and community participation, but also as a tourism experience. So you see, this is the peninsula. Till the 18th century, it was just an island. So the sails that you see are the 4 physical spaces that we have. The tours with the boats start with from the small pier. First, our visitors go and visit the Interpretation Center. Then they come to the small pier, have a ride with the boat to the other side of the island, of the peninsula, and then they have dinner in the taverna, which is back then on the other side. So this is maybe the most popular experience in Rovinj if you wish to experience traditional culture or intangible cultural heritage. All the programs, as I said, are prepared and conducted by our bearers. I wanted to also give you a perspective on our future. We haven't stopped for 20 years now. I have to say that there was a crisis in 2014 when I arrived. And they were like, okay, we have done everything. We have a lot of, programs, but what is our future? And then we were blessed with the recognition from UNESCO, but also we started a lot of European projects. At this moment, we are working with Italy on Adriatic Portland, a small-scale project focused on integrating coastal and river navigation, because for us, the biggest challenge in Croatia is to deseasonalize tourism and to delocalize from the main UNESCO and historical cities on the coast, because all the tourists come at the same time in the same place. So with this kind of tourism, we want to show them that there is also another similar tradition, and then maybe they can also visit something else, and then maybe plan accordingly their visits. The other project that I'm really proud of is the Living Heritage Journey. Martin has mentioned some of the people that participated in the toolkit, and some of them also participate in this project. I like to see it as a continuation, actually, of the toolkit. So we have Belgium, Poland, Croatia, Italy, and Sweden. All of these partners are either inscribed on the representative list or the register, except from the Thomas More University, who are here with us as tourism experts, helping us building these sustainable tourism experiences based on our local heritage. And I would like to show you a workshop we did 10 days ago. So this is, again, in front of our eco-museum. Is here, it is this building. The boat building happens here. You cannot see it, sorry. But what is important here is that we started this project and wanted to really work from the very beginning with our community. So we sat down together with some beautiful participatory embroidery workshop to engage all together and to start discussing about our food heritage, not embroidery, actually. So embroidery was there just to, come together, sit on the table, and start these discussions on how to develop our food heritage practices and promote local cuisine, which is the topic of our pilot. The key characteristics of sustainability for Batana is the community management. I have addressed it shortly. In 2004, established by a group of enthusiasts. At the very beginning, also with the help of an ecomuseologist. At the very beginning, they were closely related to the local museum because of administrative reasons, in order to pay bills and so on. But then in 2007, they decided they want to be independent and registered as an NGO. It is always the same people working, but just the organizational structure changes as the law in Croatia changes. Since 2022, because of the many spaces we are operating, the high costs, and the need for permanent employment, we developed this hybrid cultural institution. We are supported by the municipality, who pays for 2 people permanently working for the eco-museum. But we also continue with the NGO with more than 60 volunteers contributing to our programs. And what is important to say is that they decide about the programs and collaborations to be carried throughout the year, including tourism, but also scientific and educational programs. We are really proud of our educational, but also scientific programs with the local Marine Biology Institute on the status of our sea. The second characteristic is that we tend to work on small scale, so small scale programs according to resources available, and it relates to everything, from fish catch, from availability of people to do the boat rides, participating in regattas, because we have a huge participation in regattas throughout the summer season, and it's impossible to participate everywhere and to be everywhere. The third one is remuneration. Even though we promote voluntary work and many members do contribute to the safeguarding of different elements, be it cooking, fishing, riding, sailing, constructing the boat, in the core actions are always paid and when intensified by tourism activities. It doesn't mean that we do not do other things and that there are just people employed. So we do meet, we do have social gatherings, there are volunteering days, but when they really work hard, they get paid for this work. And the fourth one, intersectoral collaboration and networking. As I said, also with the educational and scientific sector, but with tourism agencies from various parts of Croatia and abroad that in the last years have been intensified, bridging more international tourism experiencing. So to come to the main point of this presentation, the bi-directional opportunities, I would really like to emphasize that we really believe, and we are a proof of it, that intangible cultural heritage and the values behind the convention can really influence the development of sustainable tourism, in terms that tourism learns from us, and not only us trying to find ways how to work with the tourism sector. So opportunities, revenue channel back, employment, spillover effect, intersectoral and international collaboration, but ICH as opportunity for sustainable tourism, it reinforces self-respect of the communities. So they feel more invited and capable to participate in decision-making. It is a sustainable practice, contributes to the general image of the destination. It offers context to experiential tourism, and through intersectoral and international collaboration, it works on building cultural bridges, and this is really important also for the tourism sector to understand. The risks, we have been talking about it, and I think that unsustainable and unfair exploitation of practitioners' work, where revenue generated through ICH-based tourism doesn't return to bearers, is one of the main ones, but also precarious work based on seasonality of the industry and the ICH practices. Over-tourism harming life balance, superficial and unidirectional intercultural dialogues, and poverty and existential needs, so adaptations as reactions to environmental and social changes are acceptable only when the practice remains meaningful to communities. I would like to finish with a concept I got introduced to through the study on tourism and ICH, and I found it really helpful for our developments as well, and it is the limit of acceptable change. So proactive approach to the creation of tourism products should be adopted, in which assets are transformed with the close involvement of local stakeholders, and whereby local space versus tourist space is negotiated with sensitivity. It is great to see that UNWTO introduced it, and that also we from the heritage sector can learn from it, to see how to work in order to negotiate with sensitivity and to put boundaries and say when can we or can't we participate. Before thanking you for your attention, I would just like to give you a very brief example of LAC for us. We were invited, and we closely collaborate with the big hospitality group in Rovinj. And once they called us that they would need a boat ride at noon with 35 plus degrees for some guests. And of course, our members are elderly persons, 70, 80 plus. And it was a very easy decision, of course, for us. But sometimes, for tourism purposes, we even put our members in danger or they put themselves in danger because they feel they need to perform or they need to do something. So even these very small decisions do apply in building sustainability in ICH and tourism. So thank you for your attention. Yeah, we're here if any question.
Collecting. Okay, we're going to do the same thing again as we did earlier. We're on a roll now. Yeah, that's yours. Collecting programs. So we're going to have the commentator by Usok, professor from the Hankook University of Foreign Studies, has some questions which I understand she's going to ask in Korean. She's got several questions and she's going to go through one at a time. So Tamara, she'll ask one question, if you can answer that, and we'll move on to the next one. And if the audience could also think of their questions when I come to ask you again, that'd be great. Okay.
타마라님의 그 발표를 통해서 크로아티아의 아름다운 도시 로빈을 만날 수 있어서 너무 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 네, 저는 살아있는 유산과 관광의 만남에서 상호 이익이 가능할까라는 주제로 발표를 해주신 타마라님의 그 발표에 매우 감사드리고 몇 가지 질문을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 제 토론문은 32페이지 한글어판과 116페이지 영어판을 근거로 읽어가면서 순차적으로 하도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째, 바타나 에코뮤지엄의 탄생 계기와 전개 과정을 간단하게 설명해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 라는 질문을 했었는데요. 발표를 통해서 어느 정도 이해할 수 있었습니다. 그런데 그럼에도 불구하고 가장 흥미로운 것은 바타나 에코뮤지엄의 존재입니다. 일반적으로 에코뮤지엄의 명칭은 지명 플러스 에코뮤지엄으로 명명되는 경우가 많습니다. 예를 들면 프랑스 에코뮤지엄의 경우 레코뮤제 크레조 몽소, 레코뮤제 달자스, 레코뮤제 브레스트브르그뇽 등 지명을 에코뮤지엄의 명칭에 넣어서 명명하는 경우가 많습니다. 이는 피터 데이비스가 말한 에코뮤지엄이 갖는 장소성의 표현이라고 생각할 수 있겠습니다. 그런데 바타나 에코뮤지엄의 경우 로비나라는 지명을 넣지 않고 로비나가 보유한 독특한 무형유산, 즉 보트 만들기의 전통인 바타나를 명칭에 넣었습니다. 저는 이 점이 매우 경이롭습니다. 이는 세계 여러 나라의 에코뮤지엄에게 영감을 주는 것이라고 생각합니다. 네, 이 점에 대해서 설명해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would just briefly explain once again that it started from this concern because there were no boats anymore there were just few boats. Through this local engagement, activism, I would say, with the help of a professional, they came after 1 year of discussions and talks with the idea of building an eco-museum. And when I say building, I mean like creating the programs that could best sustain their ideas in terms of revitalize the Batana construction. And I'm really thankful also for this question in relation to the name. In Rovinj, it happened the other way around. For them, it was really important to safeguard Batana construction and use the ecomuseological principles to do so. So they were not thinking about the whole city. Maybe it's also important to say that Rovinj until 47 was part of Italy, so we have a very strong Italian community. And this maritime heritage actually is mostly related to this community. The people that came with Yugoslavia later on from the inner parts of Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, back then Yugoslavia, didn't have this connection with the sea. By saying Rovinj, maybe it would include also all the other aspects. They really wanted to safeguard this specific maritime part of their traditions. And now, after 20 years, actually Batana became the symbol of Rovinj. So it was the opposite way around, and I'm really proud that an ICH element can do such a thing. And yeah.
네, 네, 감사합니다. 네. 두 번째, 그 발표자가 서론과 결론에서 언급하신 분야 간의 성공적인 협업 도구로에 제한된 수용 가능한 변화의 한계의 개념에 대해서 다시 한번 여쭙고 싶습니다. 바타나 에코뮤지엄이 무형유산을 매개로 관광객과 만나는 접점은 전통적인 보트 제작과 해양유산과 관련된 공예 시연, 보트 타기 행사, 미식과 음악이 있는 저녁 행사, 또 상설 인터랙티브 전시, 레가타 등 다양하게 전개되고 있습니다. 에코뮤지엄이 전 세계에서 온 다양한 관광객을 맞이하려면 스스로 변화해야 되는 부분도 있고 자신들의 정체성을 지키기 위해서 타협할 수 없는 부분도 있을 것이라고 생각합니다. 지역 주민이 주체가 되어 여러 가지 프로그램을 운영하는 것은 쉽지 않을 것이라고 생각합니다. 어떤 부분의 변화를 수용하였고 어떤 부분의 전통을 절대적으로 고수하였는지 궁금합니다.
As I mentioned, for us, the main thing was to preserve and to safeguard the process of constructing the boat. But very soon we realized that it's not enough, that other traditions supporting this boat needs to be also safeguarded in order to have, to use it, because if you don't use the boat, you don't need it. And actually, before realizing that my grandfather also was in a way or another engaged in tourism activities, for us it was like, okay, it changed the purpose, but it didn't actually, because already in the 50s it was used for tourism and fishing and transport. One thing that did change, and which is maybe the most important reason why the boat is still in use, is leisure activities. Today, besides from tourism aspects, our local community uses the boat just to go swimming, having a nice time with their families, going on a picnic on the island. So it's leisure activities that actually kept Batana alive. The other thing that I just want to briefly mention is the food heritage connected with fishing. We have, due to climate change, huge changes also within the fauna found in our sea. And for example, we had some ideas. Some people came to us asking if we can organize together some fishing thematic dinners with tuna fishing. But Batana was never used for fishing tunas. We used it for small fish, for local, very, very close by. They decided to do this collaboration, but to communicate very clearly that this type of fish was not used. So we do collaborations, but we always want to be very strict in explaining what do we do. And one other thing that we are now discussing, related also to the project that I mentioned, is on food heritage. So for San Marco, on the 25th of April, the people from Rovinj used to go on these picnics, and it was common practice to roast crabs. This was the dish that you would specifically eat on this picnic for Saint Marco Day. There are no crabs anymore at this time of the season for San Marco, but there is a new blue crab invading the Adriatic coast because of the high temperature, which is, I'm not sure, but they say from tropical seas. And now they say, our marine biologists, that the best way to fight blue crab is to eat it because it is very delicious. So we are now thinking, okay, maybe we can, because we don't have anymore the local crab, but now this is becoming our local crab. So you see there are changes, but we know from the convention that based on natural and social dynamics, ICH adapts. So I think this is a very nice example also how to adapt.
네, 감사합니다. 그 블루클랩은 한국 사람들도 굉장히 게를 좋아해서 그 한국에도 게가 많이 안 잡혀서 이제 그 블루클랩 좀 먹자 이런 운동이 일전에 일어난 적이 있었는데 예, 블루클랩이 그쪽에서도 많이 나오는 것 같습니다. 네, 그러면 세 번째 질문 드리도록 하겠습니다. 관광을 통해서 경제적인 이익을 추구하는 것과 거주민 커뮤니티를 존중하는 것은 서로 상충되는 면이 있습니다. 그렇다면 이 둘 사이에서 균형을 잡기 위해서는 공동체의 인식 공유와 결단이 필요하다고 생각합니다. 발표자가 주목한 것은 지역 거주민 커뮤니티의 사회 문화적 진정성을 존중하고 그들의 유형 및 살아있는 유산과 전통 가치를 보존하며 문화 간 이해와 관용에 기여할 것을 요구하는 점이라고 하였습니다. 이를 위해서 호스트 커뮤니티의 웰빙, 문화 자산의 유지, 관광에 대한 커뮤니티의 참여, 관광지 커뮤니티의 경제적 혜택, 관광활동의 영향 제한, 관광활동 등 다양한 방법이 활용되고 있다고 하였습니다. 그렇다면 에코뮤지엄은 이런 것을 유지하기 위해서 해마다 어느 정도의 관광객을 맞이하고 있으며 이것에 대응할 수 있는 총 인력은 자원봉사자, 무형유산 전승자 그룹 등 몇 명 정도 토탈 인원인지 또 더 궁금한 것은 이들이 에코뮤지엄의 철학을 잘 이해하고 있는지 그리고 에코뮤지엄이 지역의 유산을 전승시키고 그것을 보존하기 위해서 규칙적인 학습 프로그램이 있는지 이런 것들이 궁금합니다.
Yeah, thank you. So first to answer with numbers, Rovinj is a very popular touristic destination in Croatia. We had 3 million but not for the Eco Museum, no, the city, but it is very small. It is just 10,000 people living in Rovinj. And we had 3 million by 1st of July. And I'm saying this because all of them see the boats in the harbor. All of them see if they just walk through when we build the boats. But entering the exhibition space and going for dinner, we usually have around 10,000 per year for the whole year. Why is that? I have said at the very beginning that we want to keep it small scale. Only 2 times a week we organize these dinners because all of these people have regular jobs. We have been thinking about, opening the taverna for the whole summer to become a restaurant, but then we realized it will be only 3 months of employment, so it's impossible to for one person to then live the whole year. But also we feel that it would be impossible to keep this quality and this engagement of the local community if it becomes a regular restaurant. So we kept it on this event-based level, 2 times a week. So, and we also only accept 30 to 40 people per evening. So it's not many, but we believe that this kept actually the quality of the program as well. The organization is structured with, so I'm a professional program manager and I do international collaborations. So we do a lot of work also with museums. We have our own small exhibition space, but we collaborate with the local museum in Rovinj, especially for some events and exchange of collections as well, exchange of professionals. They helped us with the conservation of our objects, so we really have a nice communication and collaboration. But there is no regular training program, so it's me as a professional manager, then a director, a person at the reception, and 60 volunteers. All of them are part of the community. So it somehow, for now, happened naturally, because we meet a lot, we discuss a lot, we come to an agreement, come to a conclusion, and this is how we operate until now. But I think that for the future we need to think about some training programs.
네, 규칙적인 학습 프로그램이 없다면 타마라 박사님의 역할, 어떤 에코뮤지엄을 이끄는 어떤 선구자로서의 역할이 가장 중요하고 또 그게 비중을 차지할 것 같습니다. 향후에 타마라 박사님을 도울 수 있는 그런 자원봉사자들, 그리고 에코뮤지엄을 이해하는 그런 그 지역 주민들이 많이 생길 수 있기를 기원합니다. 네, 다음 질문 드리겠습니다. 에코뮤지엄은 보통 세틀라이트, 안테나, 사이트 뮤지엄 등으로 불리는 위성 박물관을 갖고 있는데 지금 타마라 박사님의 글에서는 위성 박물관에 대한 언급이 없었기 때문에 제가 잘 이해를 못했는데 발표를 통해서 5개의 그 해석 센터가 있다는 것을 알게 되었습니다. 이것이 에코뮤지엄의 위성 박물관의 역할을 한다고 이해하면 될까요?
Well, actually, it is one place, one building, with the permanent exhibition and with this documentation center where we have our basic office. Then we have this taverna, which is, we don't see it as a museum, but part of this whole interpretation of our space where we operate. We have now the shipyard, so this is the third. So we have 3 physical spaces and 2 programs, the regatta and the construction of the boats. This is like the main concept of the eco-museum. Of course, throughout the year we have many exhibitions, many collaboration, international projects. We work very much with local schools. Each kid in Rovinj has at least once been on a Batana boat, because we know how important it is to give them this connection with the sea. We organize these trips for kids and educational activities. And as I said, we collaborate not only with the local museum, but with the regional museum, with the museum organization in our whole state. We are very active on national and international level.
네, 결국은 이제 지역 전체를 에코뮤지엄의 관점에서 해석해서 그것들을 연계하는 그런 아주 그 무형유산을 기반으로 한 관광의 모범적인 사례라고 생각합니다. 앞으로도 로비나의 지역 커뮤니티가 전 세계에서 온 관광객과 바타나를 매개로 만나고 상호작용하면서 지속 가능하고 동시에 무형유산의 보호에 기여할 수 있기를 기대하겠습니다. 토론을 마치면서 아름다운 크로아티아의 로비나에 위치한 바타나 에코뮤지엄을 찾아서 바타나에 얽힌 주민들의 삶을 만나고 싶은 소망을 갖게 되었습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you for that comment. That was fantastic. Thank you. Okay, audience. Yay! Séverine first and then Amar. Do we? It's coming. It's coming. Maybe the commentators one. There's two over there. That's maybe easier. I'll break it. Hello. This is off now. Séverine.
Yeah, I'll be very short. So, Tamara, have you experienced any kind of change after the selection for the Register of Good Safeguarding Practices, either in terms of attendance or on the community itself, with regarding the process of the participatory process of making the file for submission to UNESCO?
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, I briefly touched upon it because we really had a crisis, as I said. They had a crisis in 2013-14, like, we are becoming old, we have won all national, so it was very successful from the very beginning. But they felt like, okay, we won it all, and now we work with the schools, that's it, but they really needed something more. So they were really excited with this possibility, and they participated in the preparation. But after, we really did experience changes, but only on some positive changes. That is the boost of their self-respect and believing in this project. It really was an acknowledgement for them to be like, okay, yeah, we really have to continue. This is something that we can do. It opened up this international perspective, because until then it was mostly Italy, Slovenia, Croatia. Now we work since 2016 and 17. We have done 5 big European projects with countries around Europe. But in terms of visits, not really. Actually, I have to say that I'm very cautious, and I never, we had this discussion with the mayor. Oh, you have to put the UNESCO logo. And then I explained, but we cannot. It's not a heritage site. And they were not really happy, but we explained, and they accepted it as it is. We try to promote it as a good practice, but this UNESCO label didn't bring us much in terms of visitors, but it brought us a lot in terms of community participation and this willingness to continue. So I would say that this was a very good incentive for us.
Okay, Amar. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Dr. Tamara. I mean, we had conversations before. 20 years ago, in the Batana Museum, not Batana Eco Museum, Batana Museum was launched. I was there in the library. I don't know if the library is still there. It's a documentation center, right?
And community.
Okay. I was there. I was brought from Vietnam because I was working on Halong Eco Museum. So they wanted me to share the lessons learned from Halong Eco Museum. So the whole purpose of it was to bring people, the Batana heritage people and the heritage together. And it's fantastic listening to you that after 20 years, how it's progressed. A really heartfelt congratulations. I have 2 questions. In 2004, when that forum on the launch took place, the European Maritime Museums Association had their meeting in the Batana the museum area. That was the impetus, kind of. But the local people, as you mentioned already, for a year they were discussing. And Jaško Bošnić was also coming there regularly, as you know. So is the European Maritime Museum Association still engaged or connected? That's one question. The second thing is, you dropped a bomb in your final comment. Beautiful presentation, and then you said some people wanted to have a special ride or whatever experience when the temperature was 35 degrees, but they're elderly people, you couldn't do it. So what about the intergenerational transmission to the younger people? And also to the discuss and the comment is, those of us who spent a lifetime working in eco-museums, the only training program is intergenerational transmission. That's what we consider as the best form of training and appropriate for eco-museums. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments and for adding your experience. I know that you were involved. I was not sure how. Back in 2004, I was still at university in Zagreb, and I was involved since 2014. So yes, the AMMM is still functioning, is very active, the Association of Mediterranean Maritime Museums. I'm happy to say that we, unfortunately this year, because I'm here, I will not attend the meeting in Sesimbra in Portugal. But last year we were in Italy, and so every year we meet and discuss mutual challenges that we face, not only on ICH, but also on other topics related to maritime heritage. But one thing that is important to mention is that within the forum, an idea to work on Latin and Alterzo sailing on the Mediterranean was started. And we are working, I will not say anything more, but towards higher recognition internationally. So we do work quite a lot together thanks to the forum. The other question that you mentioned, the intergenerational transmission, yes, that was an example that I wanted to use for the LAC, but I will not say it's ideal, but we do have young people, sailors. They like to compete, they like to sail, so they learn also with traditional sails. 3 years ago, we started also a rowing school and competition for them, so that in the future we will have also people rowing. And in that sense, first time in these 20 years, and probably many, many decades before, we had a woman that wanted to to row and to take guests for the tour. So it's going really well. We work a lot with schools. We work a lot with the sailing club, with kids that have also these skills on the sea, and they are really active and really wanting to participate. Also with the singing and the cooking. So yes, we are really blessed by that. Thank you.
Any more from the floor? Or can I ask my question? Oh, no, there's one at the back. We've got one. Here we go. Sorry.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 저는 남원 시청에서 관광과에서 축제 전문가로 있는 최용석이라고 합니다. 먼저 이렇게 귀한 포럼에 좋은 강연을 해주셔서 감사를 드리고요. 여러 가지 말씀을 많이 들었는데 저한테 좀 마음이 움직였던 몇 가지 단어가 있습니다. 하나는 할아버님의 인생의 경험들이 아주 명석한 손녀를 통해서 지속 가능성으로 발전시켰다는 측면에서 굉장히 인상적이고요. 그리고 말씀 가운데서 제가 느끼는 핵심은 사람이라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그리고 작지만은 아름다운 보트라고 말씀을 하셨고, 여기서부터 또 시작이 20년의 세월을 지금까지 헤쳐나오지 않았다는 생각이 들고요. 두 가지의 질문을 꼭 드리고 싶은 것 중 하나는, 결국 이제 주민 참여가 굉장히 중요한 부분이라 지속적으로 나오고 있는데, 이 프로젝트가 시작이 되어질 때 바타나 지역에 있는 주민들과 함께 어떠한 방식으로 지역민들의 어떤 동의를 함께 구했는지에 대한 것도 알고 싶고요. 그다음에 두 번째로는 이제 말씀 중에서도 이제 소득이 들어왔을 때 참여하고 있는 프로젝트에 참여하고 있었던 그 지역 주민들의 공정한 분배에 대한 부분에서 굉장히 중요하다고 말씀을 주셨고, 그다음에 운영 조직을 말씀하실 때 60명의 자원봉사자가 함께 수시로 이제 토의와 논의를 통해서 의사 결정을 하신다고 말씀 주셨습니다. 그렇다면 이 의사 결정 과정에서 서로 상충되는 논제가 나왔을 때 이 논제들을 어떠한 방식으로 해결해 가는지에 대한 방법이 좀 궁금해서 질문을 두 가지를 드렸습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for the very nice and encouraging words, first of all. I will start with the second question, which I remember better, and then I will get back to the first. So yes, first of all, I have to say that we do have some profit, but it's nothing big in terms that it is still a non-profit organization, which means that all the revenue needs to be used for the development of the organization, meaning to buy new equipment if it's needed, to construct new boats, to refurbish boats, and so on. The volunteers are not paid. Only the masters. So when, for tourism reason, they have to go and ride the boats. So when they go and ride for their own leisure, they're not paid. But when they bring tourists on board, they're paid. If they cook dinner for tourism purposes, the cook is paid. The person operating the museum and showing and explaining the exhibition, she is paid. So it is a very clear distribution of funds, which was agreed upon during our assembly. So we have yearly one general assembly of all the members, but every month the executive board meets and discusses. Of course, there have been many challenges, but through consensus we come to a decision. Actually, there were never fights on the person who should be paid or not, because always it was very clear when they work for tourism purposes, they get this remuneration. I'm very sorry, but I forgot the first question. Joanne, do you remember what was?
Yes.
Sorry.
When you first started, how did you get that community involved?
Yes. Well, maybe Mark should answer that question. Now, I'm very close with the community, and I remember this process, and I talked to them many times. I have to say that, you know, in a community, you always have a driving force. And for us, it was Marino Budicin, our vice president now. He is now retired. He, for years, was also the vice mayor of the town of Rovinj, a very simple person whose father was a carpenter. Back then, he was not vice mayor, and he really had this idea to do something. And it was a lot of negotiation. He went around talking to people. He then also met a professional, Dragana Lucia Ratkovic, who helped as a conservation manager also to plan this project. But he was really, you know, he's a person that is really rooted in its community. He knows everyone. He's a historian, and he also knows every house, who lived where. So he was really engaged in asking people for objects, in asking people to participate. We are a very small community, so everything was done in person. And I have to mention also that he was very smart to detect who can do what. So he detected one lady. She was later on also my, she consulted me quite a lot. And she was the person who was going around, knocking on the doors and collecting objects for the Eco-Museum. So it was really a community project that was based on their interactions and this will to safeguard these traditions.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask my question now? I've got a couple for you. Don't think there's any more on the floor. So from me, it's two questions. One is around the governance structures. So you had that transition in 2007 to NGO. So that's as a volunteer base, that's, you know, that formalization. But you mentioned the latest one to the hybrid 2022, and that's a big change, and I'm just wondering how that's going.
Um, it's going very well. For us, it seems that we are just changing legal status, but the people is always the same. We are always trying to see, because there is always some new law in Croatia, still adapting to this post-transitional, I would say, dynamics. So in 2007, it was popular to start NGOs. And a new law came and it facilitated. But already in 2014, there was another law on NGOs in Croatia that prevented direct financing, meaning that for each and every euro, €1, you have to go through this very complicated calls and administration. And it was really hard for many NGOs, especially the ones operated by volunteers, older people who didn't have the skills to participate in this new way of working.
So it's a misalignment of national government with on-the-ground experience.
On-the-ground experiences, yeah. Luckily for us, we had this always one professional working, and this is something that we were on at a conference a few days ago, and Marina was actually talking and said we were always lucky first to have Dragana, now Tamara, because with these cultural managers working with the communities, it's easier to get funding, it's easier to get promotion. We want to do our own things, transmit knowledge and safeguard our heritage, but we need to have support from the professionals. So I came to the idea to start this negotiation with the city council to see if there can be a way to build our organization in terms of having this financial security, at least for two people who are always there, the director and the receptionist who is working there, so that they have this full payment for the whole year. And this is why it started, actually, because it was impossible. Even though we had a lot of projects, you always lack money to invest, because you first have to pay and then you receive from the EU the funding. So it was always very difficult. And because of that, we entered into negotiation with the city, who was always very supportive. And we made such an agreement that the NGO should always be involved in decision making, even though. So we have practically now two legal bodies working together with a contract that regulates their relation.
Great. So my final question was, in terms of the tourism income generation for the area and the town, is it helping with youth retention in the locality? Does it contribute in any way?
The general?
The whole eco-museum and the interaction with tourists, do you think it's an incentive for young people to stay in that area?
Well, tourism is, but not tourism based on ICH. We really have a lot of tourism, and this is the reason why people are staying and coming to Rovinj. But not specifically because of this. We are just, I would say, a small drop in the tourism sea of Rovinj, but very appreciated by the tourism board, by the hotels. But all the money goes mostly to the hotels, to the other facilities. Nevertheless, we really have nice cooperation, and they use us as a branding. For branding purposes, marketing purposes, but they also do finance some of our activities. So I would say it's a bidirectional benefit.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to do a quick sum up now. I think one of the key words in this is people-based in your presentation, and starting off by referring to tourists as people, which is what they are. So people are at the center, but you've also, at the start of the museum, put the ICH at the center. You're very, very clear that the Eco Museum was about safeguarding that ICH and the tradition of the Batana boat building. That was the driver. But you made it a people-based community heritage practice rooted in territory, dedicated to safeguarding that maritime heritage and based on this holistic approach to culture. So you've chosen that eco-museum model as the right model for your area and the safeguarding of that ICH. Also, I would say negotiated spaces. So you talked at LAC about where the limits are, and your community seems very clear where the limits are, with this very intentional approach to the restaurant. It provides quality and a good experience, but that takes a lot to draw that limit, say this is where we're standing, and puts again the people and the safeguarding of the ICH at the center. And is that a basis for sustainability? You're here still 20 years on, so you're doing something right, particularly with a volunteer base that continues and hopefully will continue to grow at some point, and that transmission and training can be the next stage, but very intentional and people based approach. So thank you for sharing that example. It's really helpful.